Welcome, y'all. My name's Deeg. This is Basementside Chats. I'm here today with Bobby Stein, the Associate Narrative Director at ArenaNet, the studio working on Guild Wars 2. How's it going, Bobby?
It's going, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Uh, could I ask you to, for posterity and for the stream, introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Bobby Stein. I'm the associate narrative director at ArenaNet. So I help our studio narrative director, who is Tom Abernathy. Basically, the two of us run the narrative department. So we're kind of responsible for helping shape and break story for Guild Wars and any other projects that we have. And basically, my daily routine is sort of a mix of management stuff, like hiring people, running a mentorship program, trying to, you know, train and manage and, uh, help the folks who we hired to help us write the stories,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
and everything from concepting all the way through voiceover recording and all the writing for the game. And we work very closely with, game designers, artists, audio designers, QA. Basically we're in there with everybody else, and it's pretty awesome, man. I've been there for since 2005, so I just hit my 15-year anniversary.
That's exceptional.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
it's kind of wild. I think most people you talk to in the industry, they might only spend a few years in any one given place,
Mm-hmm.
and either they have a bad experience and they kind of burn out and decide to go into another industry, which games, it's like anything, right? Like I did a few different things before I got into games,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
those industries were not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of funny that I was able to get into games and that I've been there for that long. And before, being at ArenaNet, I spent a couple of years freelancing and contracting at other places like Microsoft and Nintendo, and
Mm-hmm.
just like freelance writing for some websites and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm very fortunate to have a home for this long. I think a lot of studios either don't last that long, or uh, you know, people decide to move on for whatever reason. So
Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about the role of associate director a few minutes ago. And in saying that, it sounded like collaboration is really at the soul of the job.
yeah, I think it's actually true of pretty much any discipline. It's
Mhm.
certainly been my experience at ArenaNet, and my guess is that this is true at most places. It's unless you've got a very small team where everybody is sort of able to work independently and not collaborate. I feel like we do our best work not only just creatively collaborating with our partners, but the the game is usually better off when people are collaborating on ideas. Like I'll give you
Mhm.
an example. As the narrative department, we're in charge of the story and the characters and, the VO pipeline. And we could write our scripts in isolation and just kind of hand it to people and be like, this is what we want to do. But often what happens is if narrative is not integrated with the design, it can feel very much like gameplay, then cutscene, then gameplay, then
Sure.
cutscene, and
Sure.
everything is just sort of separated, right? And there are games that do that and they do it well, and that's fine. But I think for our game, because we're a multiplayer experience, plus we want to try and weave the narrative into the environment and into the gameplay and everything else,
Mhm.
we involve the other disciplines in the story um, discussions pretty early on. So we have a process very early where we call it story breaking. It's a technique that's used in like television and film. And basically you get a bunch of people in a room and you talk at a high level, big beats, what you kind of want the story to look like from beginning to end. Just in, start here, here's a midpoint, and here's the end, right?
Uh-huh.
And from starting with those broad stroke ideas, you can start to drill down into who the characters are, what their arcs are throughout the plot. And what's wonderful about doing it in a room with a bunch of people is the ideas are flying back and forth, and a lot of times the best ideas will come from pretty much anybody, right?
Sure.
And you have to manage that process when there's a big room of creatives and people are really, getting into it. Not every idea is going to make sense or work,
Mhm.
but you want to have that free flowing kind of environment. And what we like to do is we have a few designers in our team who are really passionate about the story in our game. They know the story and the lore, and they know the characters.
Mhm.
They're the experts of gameplay, and because they're the ones who will be building these encounters and helping present the story,
Mhm.
we love having them involved in it, because they'll make suggestions on how we can tell the story within the gameplay. How we can pace moments for certain things to happen. They might have a really cool idea
Mhm.
that leans on game mechanics, but for a narrative purpose. Or they might also tell us, hey, that's a really neat story idea, but it actually doesn't work with the technology that we have, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they keep us honest in a lot of ways, and we just love having them involved, because when it comes to actually building that stuff, we're working hand in hand. So uh, I wouldn't want to do it any other way. It's certainly not for the kind of game that we make. It's probably one of the most rewarding parts of the job, because not only do you get to meet a lot of people, but you get to learn enough about what they do, enough to have, I think, a healthy respect. If I'm in a room working with a designer or an artist or an audio, engineer, you start to learn what's important to them for their craft,
Yeah.
so that when they're going to be talking about ideas or things that they want to do or ways that they would want to build something, um, you start to realize what's important to them. Um, and vice versa, they learn what's important to you and your craft, right? And I think once you build up that mutual respect, you can really create wonderful things. I think in a
Mhm.
way that if we just had somebody who is, the game director or a showrunner, to use a TV term,
Mhm.
um, at the top, who is just kind of dictating work, yeah, you can get work done, and certainly you'll get something that might be a single person's vision. But I think when you're collaborating like this and kind of relying on the expertise of a bunch of different people in different disciplines, you can usually come out with something that's a bit stronger.
Okay. Makes sense. The idea of the writer's room that you describe is pretty awesome sounding. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in one of those conversations.
We've talked about maybe giving people a peek into the process.
Mm.
We talked about, behind the scenes stuff. How would we do that?
Mhm.
I think if you can show it naturally, that'd be great. If it's just a sort of staged mock, like, here's how we do that, it could look really goofy. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, it is actually a thing that we do, though. When we're interviewing candidates for the team, we actually have them come in and do a mock story breaking session, and it's also something that I think we're going to start doing in the mentorship program. But um, I think for newer people who maybe haven't worked in TV or other games where this has been a thing that they've done, it's really educational. Um, but I think, yeah, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, I think if there were a way that we could just show our process, and I would love to hear from other, studios or developers, or just see it in a television sense. There was a series, I don't remember what it was on. It was like Netflix or HBO or Amazon or something. Like, it was about basically the writers' room, and they
Mhm.
had a few episodes where they kind of showed you what that dynamic looked like. They'd have the showrunner in there and the staff writers and the story editor, and it's really interesting. And I think a lot of it is, you're talking about getting a bunch of human beings in a room who have kind of different skill sets, uh, kind of working a problem together,
Yeah.
and certainly someone is going to be in charge of kind of shepherding the discussion to make sure that it's not just a bunch of people laughing and making jokes and, spinning their wheels. uh,
Mhm.
Trying to keep the whole group on task, and to come up with ideas that you put on a board that show, the different acts. And there's, I think, getting a bunch of people in a room, and with the goal of trying to shape a structure of something start to finish, that is specific enough that it feels like its own story, but generic enough or general enough that when you turn it over to the writers and designers and artists who are going to be working on it, then
Mhm.
it gives them enough room to where they can interpret that and kind of bring their A game.
Sure.
Uh,
You
it's
don't
pretty
wanna
wild.
micromanage it from the top.
No, I've worked with people who do that, and okay, if you let the team know that that's what the marching orders are going to be, then sure, you can get
Mhm.
people on board, and then you have to earn that trust, so that whoever is giving those the orders or the direction, you know, it's taken in good faith, right?
Mhm.
But I think we try to leave enough room for people to add their creative touch to it, to where it's not just very top down.
Sure.
But I know plenty of studios where it's a very top down thing. Um, a small group of people will get together in a room and they will kind of architect the whole thing and then just be like, okay, here's what you're doing. And for them, it works. I mean, I'm not knocking their process. It obviously works for them, but ours is different.
Sure. Yeah, I spoke with principal artist at Rogue Planet Games, a studio that works on a game called Planetside, about
Yep.
his experience doing game development. He's worked on some old MMOs, like he worked on World of Warcraft. He contributed to Free Realms and a few other games like that. And he talked about the difference between like an open-ended game design process or game development process versus like a top-down, um, kind of like it makes me think of like the great man theory of history, that history is moved by great people doing these things, and kind of like a great man theory of game development. I think he pinned Chris Metzen for World of Warcraft, kind of famously,
Hmm.
and he was talking a little bit about the perils of open-ended development, and how like the EverQuest sequels never really came to be because of
You can
that
spin your
process.
wheels for a long time if you don't have somebody who's keeping the team honest about making that progress. I've
Right.
seen it, and certainly I think you want to have key people in there who are empowered to make decisions to make sure that the process moves along.
Mhm.
Sometimes on creative teams, you can see a little bit of creative paralysis. You'll get a bunch of
Mhm.
people in a room who have great ideas, and they're great at throwing ideas up on the board, but when it comes to making decisions or taking those ideas and shaping it into something coherent, it becomes a bit more difficult.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
projects can, linger in that phase for a long time, and I do think that it's important. Um, I think the one issue I might have with the great man theory or whatever it's called,
Uh-huh.
right, or the great
It's my name for it.
person.
Take it or leave it.
Yeah, no, I've heard that, right. So,
Okay.
but like the idea that there is this clear leader or face of the project, right? And I think if you look at the game industry, you have people who I think from the outside might be looked at as auteurs, or people who are the creative center of a project. But I mean, I would be interested in talking to people on that team to find out exactly what that was like.
Uh-huh.
Like, uh, did that person, were they the sign off gate for every single thing that went through, or did they kind of trust their team and just set high level goals and then they would, you know what I mean? Um,
Right.
and to attribute the success of a project to one person, I think is also disingenuous of all the other people who worked on it,
Yeah,
because these
totally.
teams could be three, four, 500 people, 1,000 people.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and make no mistake, I think good leadership can really help a project as well as sink it.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the one thing that kind of turns me off about that concept is just it sort of ignores the specific contributions of people who probably had a really big hand in shaping it, but you would never know their name because
Right.
they're one of hundreds in the credits list, which half the time games don't even ship with credits. So,
Sure.
which is another topic altogether. But
Hmm. Game shipping with credits is not something I've ever given any thought to. How is that a
I,
topic?
well, in film, it's been a while since I worked in film, but
Uh-huh.
at least I believe, I don't think I've ever watched a film that didn't have credits, and I think some of that has to do with um, like regulations, or I'm not 100% sure. I know, like, when I worked in and around film, there were unions that kind of owned a portion of filmmaking, right? Like I
Mhm.
did lighting and grip, so there was the union that would they you know these people would handle the sandbags and these other people would handle the lights and the electricity, right?
Yeah.
So if I
Yeah.
was working as a set electrician, I would be running cable and
Mhm.
powering on lights and pointing them at people, right? And then if so everybody had their special job, and
Mhm.
if you're a camera operator, you don't touch the lights, not your department. The people who touch the lights are in this union, and everybody's got a very defined job. And I
Huh.
believe
Sounds a little
uh
territorial.
well, it is, and in a way it's good and bad, right? And
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to editorialize on that whole thing. I worked in film long enough to see some of this stuff, but not long enough to really have um something profound to say about it
Okay.
other than, wow, that's a really
It's different.
that's a thing, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, but I believe the reason that film has credits are because there is some sort of agreement, whether it's a legal thing or it's just
Mhm.
I don't know what it is, but games don't really have that. So
Mhm.
you can play a game and there might not be credits in it, and you might play a game and there are, and
Mhm.
it's just uh, I think depending on what you're playing and when you're playing it, it
Yeah.
may or may not. The whole reason that I bring it up isn't to make much of a statement other than a lot of times you wouldn't know who worked on something unless you either looked in the credits or you
Right.
went on to like IMDb and hopefully somebody uploaded them, or
Mhm.
Moby Games or something like that might have them listed there. Or it's just if you're looking at somebody's LinkedIn profile, maybe they put the thing that they worked on it, right? But
Yeah.
oftentimes the people in the trenches go unnoticed, and it's if they like working um, in sort of obscurity because they really care about the craft, that's wonderful. But if they want to be acknowledged for their contributions and they can't, or it's very difficult, that's a shame, I think.
Sure. Yeah, interesting you bring that up. I have a joke I feel like I have to say, which is with the number of names I see after movie credits, it must be against the law to not include some names. Otherwise, why why on earth would they do that to me? Especially when they put scenes after the credits. Uh,
Oh yeah, that's how they get you to stay.
maybe that's
Here's
gonna
time
be, part of the
to finish
bylaws in
your
the
pop.
future.
Yeah, right. I couldn't tell you, man. But I mean, it's everything, right? Like it'll break it down by department, and it has a ton of names. It's funny too. Like whenever I watch an animated film, I always stay to watch the voiceover cast because
Yeah.
there's a chance I may have worked with some of those actors because they did work for us on Guild Wars or whatever,
Uh-huh.
and it's it's hilarious because I'll be watching like a Disney movie, and then all of a sudden I'll recognize a few names, like, oh, hey, see, they were in that. That was
That's
pretty cool,
cool.
right?
I
Or
think it
an anime or something, right? I'm like, oh god, I could have my eyes closed and could tell you when Crispin Freeman is
uh-huh.
opening his mouth because he has a very distinct voice. So I haven't worked with him in a while, but yeah, he has a very recognizable voice.
Uh-huh.
But like Steve Bloom,
Yeah.
you have to try a little harder because like he and Fred Tatasciore
A little
and
more
there's just
chimeric.
there yeah, exactly, they
Yeah.
can do so many voices that you can't even keep track. So but then when you see them in the credits, you're like, oh, there's Julie or you know uh
Mhm.
whoever, right? So it's pretty neat. But
It's one of
sorry, we
those,
were
like, it's a
way off
small world
topic.
after all kinds of feelings. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of amazing because maybe if you don't think about it, it's just every movie sort of seems like its own entity. You don't think about the people behind it.
Mhm.
It's the same thing about games, right? Like you could find out from talking to somebody that you meet them and then they start telling you about this game they worked on like from 20 years ago, and I'm like, oh my god, I remember playing that on my Pentium 2 or
Uh-huh.
whatever, or my original Xbox, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that must have been a time, and the team was like 30 people instead of 300.
Yeah. Are you at all nostalgic for times when game studios were that size?
Uh, am I nostalgic? I mean,
Well, you've been around.
well, I mean, when I joined ArenaNet, I think I was employee number 70, right? So it
Okay.
wasn't small,
Wasn't that
but it wasn't
small. I get
big.
it. I get it.
Yeah. It, because I think when people say small, they think of like two-person indie teams,
Sure.
with a couple of outsourced folks who like did the music or
Yeah.
did,
Game I've been playing
some of the
lately
character
called
models.
Valheim. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Everybody's talking about. I've heard of it. I have not
It's rid
read anything or watched anything, but it seems to be like really popular.
it's ridiculously good. I'm a little addicted to it at the moment. But
Nice.
it's made like a handful of people, and they have like
That's
5 like
wonderful.
half a million concurrent players on Steam at the moment.
It's one, yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I saw it was like every couple of days for the first week or two of launch. It'd be like they hit the 3 million mark, they hit the
Yeah.
4 million, and I was like, wow, that's you know, it's really exciting as a developer to see your game take off like that right after launch because
Mhm.
it's going to stop somewhere. It won't go to like a billion or anything like that,
Yeah.
right? But you're like, how high is this going to go? And like every time we put something out, whether it's like a Living World release is, a
Mhm.
very specific thing that doesn't have necessarily the same, you know, splash as like an expansion or like
Yeah.
when we release Guild Wars 2, right? But when we would release the core game or one of the expansions, you know, we would be at the office and we'd have a monitor up and it would show us like concurrency, like real time. We're getting data from the servers.
Uh-huh.
And as soon as it went live, you'd see this gigantic spike and you'd be like, oh, okay, how many sales is that? Or
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing. And it's really exciting because the thing that you've been working on for, 2, 3, 5, like the core game took us 5 years to make, and finally seeing it go live to where people can play it and it's out there is wonderful. So I could imagine that the people who made Valheim are probably giddy that it's doing well. Again, I don't know anything about the studio who made it or
Uh-huh.
whatever, but one dev to another, I think they're probably having a wild time right now.
Yeah, I imagine they're very busy.
Yeah. Is it a live service game or it's like a co-op game or what is
It's,
it?
it's, what's the word? Early
Survival?
access? Early
Oh,
access?
okay.
And,
Wow.
it's multiplayer, and they're planning to add on to it, but I don't know if it's intended to have a long-term live service model. I don't get the
Okay.
impression it does. It doesn't
Okay.
feel that way.
Yeah. Actually, and we were talking about this before. I played the Outriders demo,
Yeah.
and I really didn't know anything about it before I went in. I just knew that People Can Fly was the developer, and they had done some Gears of War stuff years ago. And when I played the demo, I was like, "This feels a lot like Gears of War Judgment." I don't know if you
Mhm.
played that, but it very much
Mhm.
was like level based. They have a lot of replayability, so where you can turn up the difficulty and have all these mutators on and stuff. So
Okay.
like
Kind of like
structurally
arena-ish.
speaking,
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting game. I don't think it has a. I mean, maybe it has a PvP component, but I remember playing the co-op campaign and going in and playing a mission and then seeing, hey, if I play it and I turn up the difficulty or I add a mutator, you get better rewards, right? So seeing it in Outriders, I was like, okay, I've played this game before, but this is like the new version, and it's not a Gears of War game, but it feels like it, right? So mechanically, there's a lot of similarities, but they added this RPG like gear element to it, and there's conversations you can have with characters and
Uh-huh.
stuff like that. So
Yeah.
if you like that kind of game, which I do, it was just kind of neat to play that and go, I wonder what uh, the devs are thinking right now because when you release a demo right before the game comes out,
Mhm.
it's a scary time because first of all, your servers are going to get hammered and you don't know if there's something is going to go wrong.
Uh-huh.
And then the other thing is you start seeing all this feedback, and if people like everything, great. But if you start seeing things like this thing's broken or they don't like this, then you're like, oh God, like, is there anything we can do to
Course
make it
correct.
better or
Yeah.
address it? Or yeah, right. And if like a balance thing is usually uh, I don't want to speak for the skills and balance folks in the industry, but
Mhm.
if it's one thing to make adjustments to numbers to get things to feel better, it's a
Mhm.
lot different to meaningfully change content or make structural changes to systems
Right.
because that can be very scary on something that is about to go out. So
Yeah.
I could just imagine that they're having a time too. So yeah, so is Valheim PC only, or is it also console?
I think
Or
it's only on Steam at the moment. I don't know what
okay,
their intentions are in the future. I wasn't gonna play it because I don't really like that genre of games very much, but a friend of mine, kind of convinced me, and I just got it on a whim. And, yeah, I don't wanna make this all about Valheim, but I could talk
oh
about
yeah,
it. It's a very fun and enjoyable game, but we brought it up because we were talking about, like, the
yeah,
size of studios, and I
oh
I
yeah,
I asked you a very silly question about being nostalgic about a smaller
oh that's right.
studio,
Yeah,
and I
thank you
know
for
that
getting me back on track.
that's my job. So, I know that you followed a track from being a guy who was trading. You were a day trader, and then you
No,
were I picked up
so
pieces from different
from
places. Maybe you
like
can
LinkedIn
stitch
and
the
stuff.
narrative
Yeah,
together for me. Your own
yeah,
narrative.
sure. Yeah. Okay, so I went to school for film and television, right? So I
Mhm.
think at the time I was thinking about working in that industry, whether I didn't really honestly give it too much thought. I was like, oh, I like watching movies and TV, so maybe I'll do this,
Sure.
right? So I learned a lot about using cameras, doing lighting, doing some editing. But this is back in the day when like editing is you would take film and put it on a flatbed
Uh-huh.
machine and
Uh-huh.
cut it with, like really old school stuff, right? I have actually a 16 millimeter camera down in the basement that I've actually never run. Like I've never shot film on it.
Uh-huh.
Stupid, but it's cool. It's a
It's an
Bolex,
artifact.
I think. Yeah, I've got like Super 8 cameras and stuff.
Nice.
Super 8 is wild too because you would just put the cartridge in and shoot it, and it had the one I had a uh, microphone on it, so you could actually record synchronized sound directly to a magnetic strip that
Hmm.
was part of the film. This, I guess, like in the days before camcorders when that was a thing. Anyway, long story short, yeah, I went to school for film and kind of dabbled in that while I was in school. So
Uh-huh.
I would work as a, there was a word for it. It's not contractor. It's maybe freelancer. I don't know. Basically, I would work like a day rate on a shoot, and basically, hang a light up or you
Uh-huh.
know move sandbags around or point a camera, whatever.
Technical
Um,
stuff.
yeah, just basically working on set,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I had been writing my entire life just on my own. I would write short stories and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. But I've been playing video games ever since I was a little kid, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't know if you can probably see this, but other folks can't. I got my Commodore 64 shirt.
There it is.
Um, when I was a wee lad, um, used to learn basic programming, and I used to type in programs in like machine language, and so I didn't understand any of it. It was just like looking at a book and typing this in just to
Yeah,
get free
sure.
games.
Sure.
So
Primordial copy paste.
yeah, exactly. In the days before the internet.
Mhm.
So uh, long story short, I loved video games as a kid. When I was really young, I actually wanted to work in games, but it was like, I want to make games for the Atari, because that's how young I was.
Yeah.
Um, and then as a teenager, I kind of forgot about it and did other things, went to film school. And I think for the first year or two out of college, that's what I did. I worked on set on like TV commercials and
Mhm.
TV shows and stuff like that. And yeah, uh, I thought that was the direction of my life, and I sort of had it planned out. Oh, I'm gonna, do this for a while, and then I realized that where I was at, I couldn't make enough money to move out of my parents' house.
Yeah,
That was the
that's
motivator. I
it's a
want to
good
move
thing
out of
to
my
know.
parents' house. Well, and granted, like I wasn't doing, uh, you know, uh, super lucrative work. Carrying sandbags around and pointing lights. At least at the level I was doing, it was not necessarily um, making me wealthy or anything.
Okay.
So I had just broken up with a girlfriend of mine at the time, and I wanted financial independence so I could just kind of get out and be on my own.
Mhm.
So a friend of mine who was working at an investment company said, "Hey, listen, um, we got all these job openings for entry level people." And I did not go to school for finance, so I was like, I don't. How would I even get a job there? Even if I know somebody, why would you guys give me a job?
Uh,
And he just said, "Oh man, all you got to do is, I'll put in a good word for you." So I read Investing for Dummies because I wanted to learn how to manage my own money.
uh-huh.
And I don't like I don't like endorse the book as like, hey, buy this book. I don't make any money off it, but I read it and it taught me a lot about what to do with my money.
Uh-huh.
Just by reading that book, I could answer all the basic questions that the people doing the interviewing
Uh-huh.
threw at me. So they're like, do you know what a mutual fund is? And it was so funny that, somebody would ask a really basic question, but I think your average person probably doesn't. But I just said, oh yeah, and I explained it to him. He was like, oh, okay. So anyway, long story short, uh, bad breakup, wanting to move out of my parents' house
Yeah.
and be financially independent. I just took a job that I could, that would make me some more money to get out. And I was like, all right, this film thing, I'm gonna take a break from it, and that's what I did. So I ended up
Mhm.
working in Manhattan for about 5 years at a couple of different companies. Um, so I was on a trading floor, not at the like New York exchange, but the way that a lot of that stuff works is, you've got the New York exchange and the American exchange, and I think the mercantile exchange. Like, there's a few like trading floors in downtown Manhattan,
Okay.
but then Yeah, but then a lot of the financial companies that are around there, they'll have their own trading floors at their building, and they're kind of electronically sending their orders down.
Okay.
So, and this was right around the, right near the turn of the century, right? So,
Yeah.
um, anyway, it was pretty wild. Like, I never had any aspirations to work in that industry, but I somehow managed to fake my way in, and I was working there for a few years.
Got you out of
It
your
was
parents'
wild though.
house. That's worth
Yeah, I got
something.
out of my parents' house. I, moved into an apartment. I was living in Hoboken for a bit.
Mhm.
Uh, met somebody else, settled down for a little bit, that kind of thing. And then after doing that, so I was at a company that was about 2 blocks away from the trade center, and I was there when all that stuff went down. And it
Oh my
was,
god.
as you can imagine, it was a nightmare. It was terrible. Like the things that you saw and heard being 2 blocks away, it was just
I can't
terrible.
even imagine.
Well, I mean, if you've seen the news footage, right, or any
Yes.
of the documentaries, I mean, that's what it was like. And I remember I was at my desk, and you could hear all the calamity out in the street, and they didn't. The people who were managing the company that I was at, they
Uh-huh.
came on the loudspeaker and were like, "Nobody leave," because they didn't want you to go outside and get hurt.
Increase the panic. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And but if you looked out on the street, people were running around, and the streets were shut off. There were paramedics there. It was all this noise, and it was awful. But I remember when the first tower fell, like the entire building just started rumbling and shaking. Right. I'm at my desk, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And I remember I went over to the window, and I like put my head against it, and I could kind of look up the street, and you could see the building collapsing on itself. And then it just created this tidal wave that started shooting down the street,
Oh my god.
and everybody started running, and there was a cloud that was rolling, and it looked like a tidal wave, and there's just chunks of debris and glass, and everybody's screaming. It was horrible.
Sounds like
But
hell.
it was awful, dude. And so that was terrible, because I'm like, what just happened? Who got
Yeah.
hurt or worse? Right. And seeing this debris tidal wave come down the street, it just swallowed people up. You would see them running, and then it would just envelop them, and it would just keep going, right? And after that, like, made its way 2 blocks up to where I was, I saw it coming. I was like, all right, I got to get away from the window, because I don't know what's going to happen. And then you would just see this smoke just cover the window, and the whole room would get dark, right? And it was really loud, and then it got really eerily quiet. Like, then you couldn't hear anything, and
Uh-huh.
then the smoke kind of crept up to the window. And because a lot of the buildings in Manhattan are old, the
Mhm.
weather stripping around the windows is
Yeah.
pretty bad. And like the smoke started actually creeping in through the windows. So
Uh-huh.
even though these windows did not open, they were not sealed very well, and then the smoke started coming in. I'm like, oh god, like this is
Yeah.
creepy. And after that, then you could start to hear all the, like, sirens, and um the the fire rescue people had these beacons on them that I don't know how they work, but all I know is you could start to hear these beacons all go off,
Okay.
because that would be the thing that they would use to, like, locate each
Locate
other.
each other. Yeah, with the smoke.
It was just, yeah, sorry, I probably have to stop talking about it, because it's pretty
I understand.
emotional.
It's remarkable
It,
to live through something like that.
yeah, well, it was terrible, man. It was really wild. At some point later, I'll just finish the story, and then we'll move on. But a couple hours later, I think I was there from, like, 7 a.m., and then the first plane hit at like 8:15 or something like that,
Mhm.
and then
Mhm.
like another 15 or 30 minutes later, and I was basically, we were all in the building until about noon, right? So all that stuff had happened, and everybody was starting to evacuate, and finally they said, okay, you guys, you can all leave.
Mhm.
So we grabbed. I think I took a shirt, like that I had with me, or like a jacket or something, and I just wet. I remember reading somewhere or watching a show somewhere that said if you wet fabric like
Mhm.
a shirt or something, it can filter out smoke.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're in a burning building and you wet like a shirt and rub, put it over your head or your face, it can protect you. So
Yeah.
I and other people did that, and then we went out in the street, and it was just like, camera crews running around, fire rescue running around, and
Yeah.
we made our way up, I think, to like 40th Street or something like that, and that's where basically because um, the ferries and like the train station was just gone, it had caved in, nobody could get in or out,
Yikes.
but the ferries to New Jersey were still operating, but they couldn't dock over at the trade center because that was all just
Yeah.
a disaster scene. So they started redirecting, like every ferry that they had in the area started coming, and they were just picking up people by the boatload. Didn't matter if you had a ticket, they were like, just get on and get out of here. So
Wow.
thousands of people, the line was like a mile long, and you'd get on and people would be showing up, and they'd be covered in rubble, they'd be cut, like it looked like somebody took like talcum powder and just like threw it on their face, because like they were just
Just
like
caked.
covered in like debris and dust, and like blood, people would have cuts on them,
Oof.
and it was nightmarish, and thankfully anybody who was there was able to get up and walk around, and you would certainly see people helping other people. So that was actually, if there's anything positive to take from it, is in the face of tragedy, you will see people actually do very kind things
Yeah.
for each other.
Yeah.
um and anyway, we got on the boat and went over to Hoboken, and they basically said, "Hey, anybody who was within, X blocks of the trade center, go on this line, and everybody else go on that line." And I was like,
Mhm.
"Well, I was 2 blocks away, so I'm in that zone." And basically, they had a like a shower tent set up,
Mhm.
so you would just stand in a group with a bunch of people, and then the fire department would just hose you down, like
Okay.
because they said, "Listen," they were saying that they weren't sure if the planes had any, chemicals on them, or if it was just the fuel or what, like nobody really
Yeah.
knew exactly what happened. So they were just, I think, to be safe, they
A
were
basic safety thing.
washing people down. So then, I was soaking wet. And then, me and a whole bunch of other people who were in that group, we just kind of walked away. And, my phone had died at that point, because here was the other thing: the communications for the whole south of Manhattan had been knocked out. There was a television switching station that had failed,
Mhm.
and a lot of calls were trying to be routed through less equipment. And your cell phone will, when you turn it on, it tries to connect to a tower, but
Yeah.
if it can't, it just keeps pinging and looking for, at least some. I'm sure someone in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong here, but to my understanding, if your phone can't grab a tower, it just keeps trying, and it'll
Sure.
actually wear the battery down faster.
Yeah. Eats a lot of
So my
energy.
my my phone was dead. I was like soaking wet, miserable. I was, with a whole bunch of other people who were all just trying to, like,
Mhm.
take care of each other or whatever. And I remember the first thing I did is I was walking toward my, actually I was walking toward my sister's place, and I ran into like the wife of the drummer in the band that I was playing in at the time, and she goes, "Dave's at home. Go on over there, take a load off." And I said, "All right." And the first thing I did is I walked to the liquor store, bought a bottle of bourbon, and then just went over there and, proceeded to, drink. And I don't drink anymore, but at the time I did. And that was a day of heavy drinking, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. But sorry, I went on a wicked tangent. My apologies.
That's a
Yeah,
great
I
one.
worked on Wall Street. But
Okay.
after that, I was a lot less excited about going to work. And I ended up working there. That was September 2001. And I was there until, I think, early 2003.
Okay.
And I just, I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And I'm like, Life's short. I should do something else."
Okay.
And I had gotten it in my head that, hey, I like video games. I like being creative. Maybe there's something I can do here. I talked to a friend of a friend who said, "Hey, what do you want to do?" I said, "I don't know. I'm not a programmer. I'm not an
Mhm.
artist. What can I, what place is there for me?" And he just said, "Well, play a lot of games and, think about them and write about them, and, maybe you'll figure it out." And that's what I did, on a
Mhm.
freelance basis. And I think after a while, I was like, well, I mean, I did. a lot of writing in school, and I worked in television, so maybe there's something here. And
Yeah.
eventually, you know, I quit Wall Street, kind of bummed around for a few months, and then moved out to Seattle, and within like a week or two of being here, I ended up getting my first contract gig, and I've been in the industry officially as someone who's not just like a freelancer ever since then. So
Nice.
sorry, that was a really long story.
That's okay. Storytelling is one of the things that you're known for.
Yeah, the guy who won't shut up.
Oh, there's a certain art and virtue to that, I think. And it's that experience you shared is it's hard to put a word to it. It's quite an outlier. It's quite remarkable. Um,
Yeah.
and so you came out to Seattle, started working in games. I heard you share an anecdote on a guild chat about how your first thing you were tasked with when working with ArenaNet was the faction strategy guide.
Yeah. So when I first moved out here, my like contract work was at Microsoft Games. They were called Microsoft Game Studios at the time, but
Okay.
now they're just called Xbox Studios. But I was working on the publishing side, doing content for like Xbox.com.
Mhm.
Back in the day, actually, you had to use a pseudonym, so like nobody actually knew
A handle.
who wrote for it. Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So I wrote some stuff for them, and usually it was like strategy stuff for a game that was on Xbox, right? The OG Xbox. Uh, After that contract ended, I went over to Nintendo for a bit and was writing strategy stuff for them, right? So I'd
Mhm.
done, I'd worked on a Pokemon strategy guide, or I worked on a, Fire Emblem strategy guide, or writing articles for Nintendo Power or whatever, right? So even though I never sought out to do that, it was just sort of the work that was in front of me. So I learned how to do it.
Mhm.
Um, and when I got to ArenaNet, what they needed was somebody to write the strategy guide for factions,
Uh-huh.
which was, a couple of months in development at the time. And I was like, well, it might be a cool opportunity, and hopefully I'll go there and then I'll figure out what I want to do. Maybe I'll get a chance to work on the game or something like that.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and I think I was there like maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and they were
Uh-huh.
like, someone had left, and they're like, we need somebody to write this mission or something like that. I'm like, okay. So the next thing I know, I'm in meetings with designers, and we're talking about like what's going on in the story, and what do we want to do in the side quest and all that kind of stuff. It was
Mhm.
a real trip. But yeah, I mean, I kind of got thrown into it, and that was, a very different game than Guild Wars 2 is, right? But it was sort of my
Mhm.
first foray into writing, content for the game. And after the strategy guide came out, like we decided not to really do any of that stuff in house anymore,
Yeah.
and it's just, writing for the game full time. And I think about 2 years after I got there, um, I became lead, and then I did the lead thing for like almost 10 years,
Mhm.
on various games. And, for me, it was mostly managing a team of people who were doing a lot of this work, and
Okay.
certainly, helping guide the process. But, most of the writing was done by them, and I was sort of making sure they were, um, they knew what to write, what the standards were. I'd review their stuff.
Mhm.
But I wasn't doing as much writing at that point. Here
Sure.
and there, I would do stuff, but
So you
it
moved from
wasn't
like
my primary.
a contributor role into someone who is helping guide the overall process and make sure that standards and you
Yeah,
were able to make something that was realistic for working with the designers and everything like that.
yeah, and it was really important to me to make sure that the relationship between narrative and design was a really strong one. You hear horror stories, I think, from both disciplines of, uh, you know, maybe a writer would be difficult to work with, or a designer might be
Uh-huh.
difficult to work with, right? And to me, it was so important that if you want to tell a good story in the context of a game, that the people should be on the same page and collaborating together. So I tried really hard to make sure that those relationships and collaborations were strong. So that was sort of the focus. And we had actually for Guild Wars 2, we didn't really have a VO pipeline for Guild Wars 1. It was very like I remember talking about this like years and years ago. So Guild Wars 1, you would play it and there wasn't a ton of spoken dialogue. There just might be in the cinematics and bookending the missions or whatever.
Right.
Or there might be a pre-rendered cinematic, when you fire up the game, but we're talking a couple of hundred lines of dialogue max.
Yeah.
And
Compared to Guild
when
Wars
we
2, not the same world.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's night and day. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, so when we started talking about what we wanted to do with Guild Wars 2, the concept was like, well, how do we want to make this game feel different, right?
Mhm.
Well, number one, we went from being you know, a, a cooperative game that's just, instance based. You go out with your party and the world is a copy for you and that kind of thing,
Right.
to something that's more like a traditional MMO. Obviously you've got your towns with, hundreds of people in them, but then when you go out into the world, there's hundreds of people hanging out.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and you know, I I think had come off of playing GTA 4 at that point, and I was really enamored with the way that Liberty City just felt very fleshed out. You drive around, you hear people talking, and there was
Yeah.
always like a lot of activity going on, a lot of
Yeah.
ambient dialogue, and just everything was very immersive, right? And I
Yeah.
was like, man, wouldn't it be great if we could do something like that, but in a co-op RPG?
Uh-huh.
And obviously, Guild Wars 2 is a very different game, but at the same time, I wanted to take things that I think would make being in an immersive world feel really unique, right? Um, Guild Wars is a fantasy game, and certainly we borrow from standard tropes, but I think we've also tried to do things that make it feel uniquely Guild Wars, right?
What are
And
some of those things?
uh, oh man, you had to ask that one, right?
Well,
Well, all right.
I can suggest a couple, and you can tell me if I'm right or
I
wrong.
mean, sure.
Like, one of the things that strikes me is just all the drive-by dialogue, like you're mentioning. Like,
Yeah.
you're playing and you're hearing stuff at the same time rather than being the back and forth.
Yeah, I mean that actually I'm glad that you mentioned that because that was I'd rather talk about that than
Alright,
uh other
let's
topics.
do
But
it.
yeah, so I think one of the things I think the development team sort of prides itself on is making it feel immersive. Like every once in a while I'll go on to, Reddit or Twitter or the Guild Wars forums or whatever, and
Mhm.
people will talk about their first time walking around when they hear a lot of the ambient dialogue in the scenes, and some of it is directly relevant to what's going on thematically in the story, but some of it
Uh-huh.
is just meant to be slice of life. This tells us something about the people who live here, or it might just be a funny little side story, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
may or may not actually connect to anything, but the whole idea is to make you feel like you're in a place with
yeah.
real people,
Or
right?
things are happening without you causing them.
Yeah, and hearing people talk about the game affectionately because that is an element that they like of it,
Uh-huh.
it warms my heart. Obviously we worked really hard writing the content, but the designers I know had to script all that stuff.
Yeah.
Put the characters on a path and have them on a schedule, and make sure they're calling the right animations. And we had to work with a lot of different people to make it feel like that. And it was sort of funny. Like we would write the scenes and kind of communicate to the designers, here's kind of like what we're hoping we can do, and then they would kind of go off and do it in the way that they knew how or the way that they felt was best. So obviously it would change a little over time, and that was with the first generation, I guess you could say, of our dialogue system,
Okay.
the one that shipped with the game when we launched it, which is
Oh, with the
a
side by
lot more.
sides?
I mean that we had that in it, but I'm just talking about when
Oh,
you're walking in the world
yeah,
and there's ambient dialogue happening.
yeah.
That was actually a system that was originally built for the game. That, like, one way to look at it is the way that the game were, and I'm going to butcher this, and I'm sure there's going to be like a client server programmer who's going to want to murder me for like getting the facts wrong. But some of the
Asterisk.
way that, yeah, right. Some of the way that that stuff is managed is by the server, right? The server is saying, okay, put the people here, have them do this and that, and everybody who's connected to the game can see it, right? And there's
Yeah.
maybe a little bit of latency, but everybody should see and hear mostly the same exact thing with maybe a little bit of
Yeah.
slight delay, right? But it's kind of magic the way that it happens, because you know what, you can always kind of see behind the curtain if you're ever playing like a co-op or a multiplayer game.
Mhm.
Do it in the same room as somebody else who is connected, and then look over periodically to see is everybody standing in the same exact spot? Is everything look exactly the same, or are there a couple of details that are
Right. Or
maybe
is
a
it
little
or is
different?
it magicked up on the client side to look like there's a shared world?
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So, again, I think if you ever want to get into that topic, definitely get like a server programmer or somebody who really knows that world. Um,
It's a good
but
one.
all this is to say, the original way that we had our dialogue system built was that a lot of that stuff was more managed, I believe, on the server side. So the it would trigger the dialogue, but it wouldn't sound like the timing was very rigid.
Uh-huh.
Line would play, then the next line would play, and then when that was done, then the next line would play, and it would actually time the intervals based on the longest file length. This is
Okay.
probably too much about how the sausage is made, but
No, I
basically what
love
would
this. Go
happen
on.
is our game is played in multiple languages, so we
Mhm.
localize the dialogue and all the writing in a variety of languages, right? And because something might be recorded, like translated and then recorded in another language, unless we instruct the um, recording studio to match the exact line length of how long it takes to say this thing,
Right.
uh, it'll be a little different. It might be a little longer, a little shorter, or way longer, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the way that the game would work, though, is it would just look at whatever the longest line that we got was, and then it would time it so that uh,
Mhm.
it would space the lines out. And sometimes there was just more of a gap
Gaps.
than
Yeah.
felt natural, right? You'd get the dialogue, but it would certainly not feel organic, right?
Mhm.
Um, fast forward a couple of, and we also had those side by side
Mhm.
cinematics, which, I know why games use them. And actually, I think for what it was, ours were fine. We could
Mhm.
have higher res models, and we could have custom animations, and we could have lip sync. And like, there was a lot of things in it that were really good.
Yeah.
But I think, the trade off of doing that is it pulls you out of the game. You kind of have to watch it, and either, you have to watch it to the end because it's unskippable, or you can skip through it, but then you kind of end up missing out the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's plot or dramatic moment between two characters or whatever, right? And when our audio programmer at the time said, "Hey, listen, I want to change this system." Oh, it's like, so I'll give you an example. When
Okay.
two characters in the core game talk to each other in the open world,
Mhm.
you'll notice that 99% of the time they're not moving, they're not walking anywhere,
Uh-huh.
because the way that the system was built for that originally was that the characters would have to stand in place to do their thing,
Stand and
and then
deliver. Got it.
stand and deliver. Right. The only thing that you would maybe see once in a while is they would be walking and they would say like one line,
Mhm.
and that would be it. Or uh, they could be moving and a scene would have to be sort of stitched together through a lot of like hand scripting, and it was just a nightmare, I think, for the designers.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
long story short,
syncing up the world state with the dialogue was a challenge, it sounds like.
yeah, it basically was done in a way that while it was very functional and it made the world feel alive because you were just surrounded by
Mhm.
sound. Just the dramatic tension of a scene, characters were it. You kind of lost it. It was almost like they were reciting their lines in a way. So
Mhm.
at any rate, after launch, our audio programmer made some changes, and the scenes would actually be timed independently of each language, so that it would just look relative at the time between the line that was playing and then the next one.
A little more
And
dynamic.
yeah, and you could basically have characters talk over each other. You could have a really long pause if you wanted. You could have them cut each other off.
Yeah.
You could have them moving and doing things and animating at the same time, but you could actually have like an entire scene or a sequence of scenes stitched together.
Way more
So it
natural.
just, yeah, it just allowed us to do a lot more things. And man, as a creative, it was so empowering. And the funny thing is, I think most people who worked on the game who didn't deal with the dialogue system had no idea that any of these changes went in.
Mhm.
But for the designers and for the narrative team, we were uh, we felt like a gift had been handed down from the heavens, because it would just allow us a lot more control. We could
Yeah.
even have characters turn and face and do special animation. At one point, we actually had like a lip sync animation pipeline, and it gave us a finer degree of control over something. And
Uh-huh.
you don't really think of MMOs of necessarily doing that sort of stuff, or not necessarily doing it at the same like fidelity or scale as maybe a big budget
Mhm.
AAA action game. right? But that was certainly, it allowed us to do more of those things that we liked experiencing in other games, and
Mhm,
it felt really great to be able to do that in our game. So I think one of the things that I just really love about the game is that we can, if we're given the time and the resources, we can really
mhm.
create an immersive environment, and between the art and the lighting and the layout and the design and the writing and the voiceover and everything else, like we can do really cool things that might, yeah, they're a lot more common nowadays in online multiplayer games, but back when Guild Wars 2
Yeah.
came out, I think it was a little bit more unique, and it was a real it was a real trip to be involved in those systems from the beginning, and then writing with big teams on making content for that. It was just, I still kind of think back about how lucky I was to get in on that project at the very beginning
Uh-huh.
and work with a lot of people to help shape that in some form.
A gift from the heavens. The Bobby the Narrative
Okay,
team.
maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but it was pretty wild. I,
I
I was definitely very appreciative.
I can relate a little bit. I work in professional services, and sometimes I will get a technological gift from the heavens that changes the way that I work.
Man,
I'll be honest, it's often a curse, not a blessing. But yeah, I can relate to that somewhat.
the tools programmers are your friend. I
Yes.
can't speak highly enough of really awesome and engaged tools programmers who care about making a thing that the outside world is never going to see or use,
Yeah.
but they'll just see the product that you can make with it. But um, I love it when you're working with somebody who really cares about building this really great thing that makes your life easier.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, we actually just had some programmers come back who had left a couple of years back, but now they're back on the team, and just working with them again is just such a privilege.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It sounds like you really just value the human collaboration component of the whole process of making
Yeah, are
games.
you kidding me? Well, I mean, I always here's this is going to sound like a goofy statement because it'll sound like the California Dairy Association, where it's like happy cows make good cheese. I don't remember what it is, right? But I always say, like, happy devs make great games.
Yeah, yeah,
If
yeah.
you like your work and you work with cool people and you're not fighting against the process or the people, right?
Mhm,
Then you can just be creative and do good work, right?
mhm,
So I think the studio culture is a thing that I think is important to a lot of people. It's certainly important to me. I
mhm.
actually got more involved in studio level um, stuff, with the mentorship program, and I'm helping with the DEI stuff. I
DEI?
just care. Yeah, diversity, equity, and
Oh,
inclusion. It's basically um, what we're trying to do, which is what actually a lot of companies are trying to do. Is just make sure that when we're hiring, that we're being fair and making sure that we're talking to as many candidates as we can. We want to find
mhm,
good talent. We want to make sure that we're getting a diverse group of people to meet and consider,
mhm,
right? And then when it comes to hiring people and keeping them happy at the company, making sure that we're not overworking them, making sure that we're compensating them fairly, because we work in an environment where there are a lot, and you could throw a snowball or whatever in any direction, and you're going to hit any number of high powered
yeah,
studios, right?
yeah,
And some of them are way bigger than us, right? And we need to uh, create an environment where people want to stay.
mhm,
So compensate them fairly, treat them fairly, listen to what they have to say. If there are problems, make sure that we're addressing those problems, because I think all of us have worked at places, whether in games or elsewhere, where you might have somebody who's just not a very nice person, or they're not doing their job, or this person
mhm,
said a really awful thing in a crowded room and nobody called them out on it, right?
yeah,
Or your boss didn't do anything about it, right? So I think we just need to do better, and an evolving thing. I mean, I think every
yeah.
when you're dealing with people, right? There's a learning process, and you have to hold yourselves accountable to things, and you also just have to strive to every day come in, making it a good place.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying about Um, the um, happy devs make the best milk or something. What was it? Something like that. Make the best games. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, sorry.
yeah, just yeah. Happy devs make great games. That's
Definitely not what I said. Um, Maybe what I can do is make it a more general question about narrative design,
okay.
and ask you like what it is you look for in a narrative designer, and then talk
So
about the inclusion process after that.
sure, you mean when we're if we have a like a job opening, sort of what we look for?
Yeah, or this mentorship program. Like what qualities are you identifying or
Sure.
facilitating? Like those kinds of things.
Yeah. So let's see. Um, yeah, I think when you're recruiting, you want sort of you have to look at the entirety of what a person brings, right?
Yeah,
What their skill set is. Can they do the job? And obviously that's the most important thing. You don't want to hire somebody who's really great to have a beer with, but they can't do the work that you need them to, right? So
yeah,
you have to hire somebody who can do the work and knows the craft, right? So that they're making you stronger as a team. But you also have to bring in somebody who shares your values, right? You don't want to hire somebody who's really amazing but a total jerk to work with,
yeah.
um, and you want to hopefully have people who are really excited about the project that you're working on. Um, so I mean, those are some just really high level general things. I mean, I think if you ask anybody who's in a position to hire, they're going to want somebody who has these aspects about them, right?
Skills and
Um,
values. Hmm.
yeah, exactly. And what we look for specifically in narrative is, the first thing that we ask for, right, is a portfolio. We want to see the work that you've written so that we
Hmm.
could evaluate your craft uh, competency, right? We like, well, we pretty much require screenplays or teleplays. A lot of what we're doing is we're writing stories that are being acted out and presented in a visual and audio manner, right? So we want to see scripts that are written to do that. It's not that if we see a prose piece, like a short story or an excerpt from a book, that we can't get a sense of a person's
Uh
writing
huh.
style, but we like to see something that is written in a format that it is easily translatable. So
Yeah.
they might write a spec script for a show that they like or want to maybe work on, or just put a story together just to showcase their craft
Show their
skills.
thought
Uh,
process, how they actually
yeah,
contribute. Yeah.
or a game script, or sometimes we'll get comic samples, but
Okay.
or narrative design docs that come with their dialogue script. But anyway, those are the
Hmm.
things that we like to read, and we'll read as many as they send us, right? And I've read entire 120-page screenplays, which can take a while. But really, I only need to read as far as by the time you get to the end of an act, right, or the end of a sequence, you can start to see the decisions, the creative decisions that somebody's making
Hmm.
with their characters, how the characters are interacting, what are they sort of setting up, and how are they paying it off later, right? It's just real basic storytelling craft skills, but you might not see what you're looking for in a lot of samples, right? You might
Hmm.
see some good dialogue, but when you look at the entire story, it's not really going anywhere, or it's not.
Structurally. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly, right? So we want to see, a real competency in the structure, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's a 3, 4, 5 act, whatever. But also what they're doing with their characters. Have the characters changed? Have they gone through an arc by the time the story has resolved, right? Because we care a lot about the characters, and we want be, a character going through an arc that is relatable to the person who is viewing
Uh
it,
huh.
right, or watching it or playing it.
Yeah.
It can really uh, someone can connect with the story, right? When the characters are going through something that they can empathize with, right?
Hmm.
So it's not enough for us just to see the kind of plot structure that okay, you've set up something that mechanically resolves,
Yeah.
but we want to see how the characters are affected by it, right? Because
Yeah.
people can relate to them.
The
So
ancient craft
beyond
of
that,
storytelling.
exactly, right? So beyond that, we want to have conversations with them to see what they're like. Maybe we'll ask them questions about our game sometimes, but also just what games did they play? What
Yeah.
do they think about when they're playing them? Are there any games that had stories that resonated with them or maybe didn't resonate with them, and can they tell us why? If
Uh-huh.
they were going to change or improve something in the game that we make, what would they do? So
Mhm.
we really want to get an understanding of sort of like we want people who are craft literate in screenwriting, but we really also want people who are have that kind of narrative design brain where they're constantly looking at how something was made and how the story is being presented
Right, right.
with within the gameplay confines, right?
Yeah,
So that's really important. And then just really, what would this person be like to work with, right? How
yeah.
would they create conflicts with employees? Would they resolve conflicts with employees? Are they easy to get along with? What
Hence
is sort
the
of their thought process?
the, mock writers' room thing you were talking about earlier.
It really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've I've never noticed, I've never witnessed anybody fly off the handle in those situations, but I have actually on a couple of occasions. People will kind of say something a little questionable, right? Or someone will make a
Ah,
comment, but they'll ignore that person, but they'll totally listen to this other person. And you're like, why are you picking a favorite in this room of people who you don't know, right? So are
huh,
they displaying some sort of bias that is impacting their ability to work with a group of people?
interesting.
Um, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, these are all the kind of things that I think you have to look at because when you're inviting somebody into a group and a smaller group of a team, but then a larger group of, a project, every person that you add is kind of changing the dynamic. And
Right.
you want to constantly, I think, bring in people who challenge you to do better, who bring skills that you maybe don't have, kind of
Yeah.
looking at the team as a whole, like who's really, it's almost like putting together a rating party, right? You're not going to have 5 or 10 people who all have the same build.
Mhm.
You're going to want build diversity, right? So like when you're building a team, it's kind of the same thing. This person might be really great at doing Golden Path, but their narrative design sensibilities might not be so strong over here.
Yeah,
So if
you
we
wanna
hire this
complement
other
each
person
other.
who is exactly right, so we try to build a team of diverse skill sets, but also a diverse perspective. And hopefully, what that means is we're able to make a game that satisfies our fans, but then also can hopefully tell stories that go beyond our existing audience and go deeper into the world and you know bare minimum put a smile on some people's faces, but maybe get them to think.
That's an lovely ideal. I really like that. And I'm not saying that like it's not something that's realistic. Like, I don't mean that in like a, "Oh, it's an ideal far off
Oh
sense."
yeah, you're not. I didn't think you were being
Yeah.
dismissive or anything.
No, absolutely not. Um, it sounds like because, yeah, like, you hear a lot of stories about in-game development, at least as an outsider, about, like, okay, this game got produced and it's okay or it's great or it's whatever, but then you hear a story about how it was made and it's like, "Oh god. Ugh.
Yeah, I always
Ugh."
those stories always kind of bum me out. Where a game that maybe you really like playing, and then when you find out what the body count was to kind of get it out, how many
Yeah.
people they burned through, or just
There's
how
stories of
awful.
stress casualties and things
Yeah,
like
it's
this. It's like
you
and
know,
it
and I was just gonna say, to be fair, like in the industries that I've worked in, I kind of saw a pattern where people would overwork, right? Whether the company was overworking them or they were overworking themselves or both.
Mhm.
Um, working on Wall Street was a bit
Yeah,
of
I
a
can
meat
imagine.
grinder. The hours and the daily stress. Uh, I was working there, and somebody had a heart attack on the trading floor, right? So that's that the stress is high if people are going to actually have health problems. Thankfully the trader did not die, but like it's scary. I mean, really, you're seeing somebody who you work with who is so their body is so overtaxed,
Yeah.
right, with stress or hours or whatever,
Yeah.
that it will fail.
Yeah.
And I you know, television too. In fact, I may get the name wrong, but back when I was working in TV, there was I think he was a cameraman.
Mhm.
I think it was Brent something or other. Anyway, long story short, a shoot went way over time. So normally after like 10, 12 hours, then you get into overtime territory and
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
like that. So like, but you if you don't get the shot or the scene done, you want to get it done. But the problem is then people have to work all this overtime to like finish the shot
Yeah.
because they don't want to like break it down and then go another day. And
Yeah.
it's you've got the producers are all trying to keep everything on
On
task.
schedule. Mhm.
Exactly. So, but what can happen sometimes, or what did happen in film when I was in it, was the shoots would go really late. I was on one shoot that went 24 hours straight,
Ugh,
right? So all the Teamsters, once it hit like 12 hours, they were all like making a lot of extra money. So maybe they were happy that they were going to get a real big check
got a
at the end of it.
boost.
But yeah, but also everyone was really tired, and when you're working around electricity and generators and heavy equipment and stuff, mistakes
Mhm.
can happen. And the more tired you get, you can have people getting hurt. I actually saw a Fresnel lens on this like 12K light, so it's like 12,000 watts, and it got wet and it shattered glass. And the, um, I guess it was the Best Boy Electric, or the second electric, she had basically hurt her hand. She was, the glass got in her hand and
Mhm.
cut her, right? So it's just bad things happen when people are overworked. And
Yeah.
at any rate, there's a different shoot. I was not on this. I think it was some movie in Hollywood. But basically, they went really long. Guy was driving home, got into a car wreck, and died. Right.
Shit.
So they were like, "Hey, we got to really put a clamp on this because people will overwork themselves, right?"
Yeah.
And it unfortunately for a lot of people, it takes a tragedy to get them to realize, "Hey, maybe we should rethink how hard we
Mhm.
push people because this is not worth dying for. This is a job." Right. So.
Mhm.
Um, when you hear about stories that are along those lines in other industries, including game development, it's concerning, right? You don't
Yeah.
want to hear about, families that fall apart or people who have to go to the hospital because, they can't keep up with the relentless pace.
Mhm.
That's terrible, right? So we
Mhm.
have to do better. Otherwise, we're just going to burn people out. They're going to go into another line of work, and we don't want to chew people up and spit them out. We want to actually retain good talent so that we can
Yeah.
continue to learn from that and make better things, right? And grow as an industry. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, you hear about the horror stories, and it breaks your heart.
Yeah. I wanna ask you a general question about, like, just the phenomenon of crunch in the industry. Um, I haven't heard a lot of stories about ArenaNet doing crunch, and from you hearing your philosophy, I can imagine at least the folks that work around you don't have to deal with it. It sounds like you really highly prize work-life balance.
We try very hard. Have people worked more than 40 hours a week? If needed,
Yeah.
there have been occasions where people have had to put in some overtime to get something done. But usually when people talk about crunch, what they mean is kind of like the relentless 70, 80, 90-hour work week that
Yeah.
is
For
extended
weeks
over
and months. Yeah.
weeks and months and stuff like that. It has not been my experience at the studio,
Mhm.
that we would engage that, right? It's certainly not in our department, but there have been a couple of times where we're down to the wire and it's taking
Yeah.
a long time to get something done, or somebody gets sick, or family emergency, and then we're down like a one or two people, to where you're like, okay, this stuff's got to get done. We can't, and then people have to basically, so I've worked the occasional weekend, but
Mhm.
as far as me crunching, I haven't crunched in I don't know how long.
What's the
We do
the hardest
we
you've
do
had to haul ass to get something done?
There was a period, I don't know, sometime over the past couple of years, I don't even remember which release it was or
Uh-huh.
whatever, where I worked like 2 weekends in a row,
Okay.
right? Um, but I was able to, I think, work from home. So I would get up, I would go into, the computer, and, that was actually one of the things. I think I was actually, working in the tool and doing some writing and
Mhm.
some narrative design stuff. But, um, I've worked other jobs that pushed me a lot harder.
Mhm.
Um, whether it was Wall Street or whether it was working in retail. Like retail is relentless, man.
Yeah.
In the brief amount of time so after I quit Wall Street, I worked in in real estate for like 2 weeks.
Mm.
I went, I got my certifications, and then I was working a phone bank trying to, this was at the very beginning of online realty, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Uh, Hated it, didn't like the company I was working for, didn't like the work I was doing, and I bailed, right? So now here I was certified to sell real estate, but I didn't have a job. It was so
Uh,
stupid, right? I was in a bad spot. This was after 9/11. I was still kind of getting my head straight
mhm,
and was like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Um, but then we knew that we were going to be moving to the Seattle area. But I was just like, I need to work, right? So I was picking up temp jobs once in a while. But
mhm.
I got a job at a game store, man.
Hey.
I was slinging, PlayStation games and Xbox games and that kind of thing, right? And part of it was I loved video games, so it was really great to be able to just talk to people. Like you'd get somebody coming in saying, "Hey, I want to get this gift for
Mhm.
my kid, my spouse, my significant other, whatever," right? And you can kind of ask them questions and kind of eke out uh, maybe what this person might like and give them
Right.
advice. And there was something really cool about that because you're connecting with people, you're
Yeah,
just talking about a thing that you love, right? And that was
yeah.
awesome. Uh, the pay and the hours were not great. And some of the sales tactics, I'm not going to name the company, but the stuff that I saw working in retail, I'd be out for 12 hours, my legs would hurt, my back would hurt, I'd realize that I didn't make that much money, and the district sales manager was a total butthole, right? So like all these things combined, I was like, man, I have a lot of respect for people who can grind this out because it's hard work. It's kind of thankless, especially when you get customers who come in and they're just really not
Yeah.
respectful. Um, you know, uh, I think it's important to have experiences in life that kind of teach you that. It teaches you what it feels like to, uh, you know, not necessarily be in an easy position, right? It
Yeah.
can kind of teach you some important life lessons, but it also, gets you to appreciate the people who are doing that work because
Right.
I think, they work hard. A lot of times they are looked down upon by rude people, and I don't think that's fair. Um,
Mhm.
and even though it's not a career path that is for me. There are people who do it, whether it's because they love it or it's out of necessity or some combination of those two things.
Right.
But seeing what that kind of life was like really kind of humbled me, I think, in a way that when I finally got into the game industry, I started realizing like between working in film or between working on Wall Street or between working in retail, like I had seen all these different things and it kind of gave me perspective so that when I actually, got into the game industry, I had had enough experiences to where I could take this in as a new thing, but also look for warning signs of stuff that maybe I could avoid, or even just, hey, understand that when you're at a
Mhm.
convention or you're going to the store to buy a thing, treat these people with respect. They're working hard, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, it sounds like
Sorry, I'm
you've
just going all over.
well, it sounds like you've developed a real sense of, like, um, of perspective about, um, essentially, like, working with your fellow man and woman, like, and a real respect for the fact that we all depend on each other, which we
Yeah.
absolutely do.
Yeah. I think that is a very succinct takeaway.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
What Guild Wars character stands out to you as being particularly fun, or you can pick whichever way you want to approach this, fun or challenging to write?
Hmm. I mean, you know what I'll do? I'll talk about characters that I've written for, but then I'll just talk about characters that the
Sure.
team writes for, right?
Yeah.
Because so for starters, everybody in the narrative team pretty much touches everything, right? So um, you can imagine any character in the game, like everybody's written something for Ritlock at some point.
Sure,
Everybody's
sure.
written something for, Timey or Canuck or
Takes a
whoever.
village, right?
Exactly, right? I think some of the fun ones are, for the group, when they're writing Canuck, he's kind of fun.
Uh-huh.
Um,
That kind of snarky kinda
yeah, I mean, there's sort of a kind of a sarcastic element.
yeah.
Here's a character who kind of started off as kind of like a mercenary character in a way, going all the way back to the South Sun stuff. But
Uh-huh.
as someone who has sort of uh, did a bad thing, was incarcerated, was on a work release program. You spent some time with him, and basically he had to pay off his debt before he became sort
Mhm.
of a full fledged member of your group. Um, Putting him on that arc was really cool because we could do some interesting things and show the dynamic between him as a character. I think there was a somewhere in maybe season, geez, what was it? I don't remember, the season 2
Mhm.
or season 3. Anyway, there's a point where you're at a party, and him and I think Countess Anise are sort of
Yeah.
trading barbs back and forth, and I remember that being kind of a funny moment. That
I remember that. I think it was in season
you
3,
know,
I believe.
yeah, yeah, you would. It was at some like party of nobles or something like that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, Stuff like that was really fun, and I know that the folks who wrote it, and when we took it kind of in for script workshop and stuff like that, it was a lot of fun to kind of shape those things and make sure that they said what they needed to say, they implied the right thing, and you kind of got the subtext of the
Yeah.
relationship between the two characters. Um, Canuck's a fun one. Ritlock is, I think, yeah, there he is. Actually, what's cool about this one
Big and
is
bold.
my wife actually got that signed by Steve Bloom, so it's sort of
Oh.
yeah. She was at Comic Con and brought it to him and said, "Hey, listen, my husband works on the game with you." And
Uh-huh.
then what did you give him, a T-shirt or something? Oh, yeah, she brought him a Go Wars T-shirt and he
Uh-huh.
signed it. And he was like, "Hey, Tail Bobby," I said, "Hi." Yeah, I've worked with Steve a whole bunch. He's a great dude. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah, yeah, he's a great guy. Or Ritlock is a fun character. I love Lord Farron just because he's such a goofball,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you can have some fun with him. He's such a I mean, there's definitely silly moments where he's running around in his speedo or whatever, but
Right.
deep down inside, he has a heart, and he's somebody who was threaded really early into the personal story, and we didn't do much with after that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I think once we got into Living World, we wanted to periodically use him for either I mean, comic relief is fine, and we certainly have fun with him as a character, but I think once you kind of understand a little bit more about who he is, and we can do meaningful things with this story. He's a fun one to write.
Yeah.
Yuri Lowenthal is such a joy to work with.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had a lot of fun writing dialogue for Glenna, who's the raid character. She takes you through on a whole bunch
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
raids, and she was kind of fun. She started off as just a merchant NPC in the first
Mhm.
raid wing, and we didn't really think much about her. Um, I think the whole thing started where in the first raid wing there's a crashed airship like up in the tree, and
Mhm.
if you it's been a while since I worked on this thing. There's a way you can get up and interface with her to buy
Yeah.
gear,
Like a
right?
lay
And I think
portal or something like that.
yeah, exactly. You
Yeah.
have to like kill a boss, which then opens a lay rift, and then you can get
Yep.
up there.
Yes.
Um, but it was funny because the content programmer who was doing game design on that raid, he said, "Look, people shouldn't be able to get up here unless they do this, but Mesmer portal."
Uh-huh.
There's probably going to be an edge case where somebody figures out how to get up here,
Yeah.
and I think they did actually. But we put a funny little check in there that basically said if you had killed a raid boss and you have this progress bit set on your character, obviously it's business as usual. And she says kind of like, "What do you want to buy?"
Uh-huh.
But if you didn't, she goes, "Hey, how the hell did you get up here? Uh, get out." Because basically we wanted to set up the rules that she wouldn't sell to you unless you had done this thing, right?
Uh-huh.
So, but we wrote kind of a funny thing that most people would never see, and that was sort of the first experience where we're like, "Oh, she's kind of sassy or whatever."
Uh-huh.
Um, and really, when we started talking about like, so the first three raid wings are basically it's like a three-part story,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And once we started saying you're going to go into the next area and you rescue, the first wing, you kind of learn what's going on, and there's
Yeah, it's
hints
kind of a
of
big mystery. You're kind of just
yeah, it
getting
starts off as
into
a
it.
mystery, and in the
Uh-huh.
second one, the mystery is revealed, and then the third one, it's like you're kind of going in there to do some damage.
The
Um,
confrontation. Mhm.
yeah, but the interesting thing was once we got into the second one, we started exploring the idea of having her being a little bit more prominent, and I
Mhm.
I don't think she had much to do or say in there. She certainly, I don't think, followed you around except as like a vendor. Like you would beat a boss and then maybe she would move forward.
Mhm.
But in the third one, we're like, hey, let's actually have her as a character. She'll go with you. And I remember, working with the designers on that. There was that whole event where basically she's carrying a bomb, and the
Yeah.
whole idea is people can like bring her around to where she can set off the bomb, but also you need to keep her away from the wargs and the other
Yes.
enemies that are, they could kill her and then she drops the bomb and you fail, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Classic escort.
yeah, right. But being able to write all this like conditional or situational dialogue where we had a lot of fun with that, right?
Uh-huh.
Uh, and we played around with the dialogue system for that because like normally when you do a story instance, whoever owns the instance, whoever goes in first,
Mhm.
you're the character who you're the player who talks.
The
It's all
POV, yeah.
about you.
Mhm.
Yeah. But when you go into a raid, anybody can talk, right?
Right.
So, if you're the first one to the bridge, if you call Glenna over, or if you interact with this gadget, like whatever,
Mhm.
we've written dialogue so anybody can kind of say things out loud and the characters might respond. So that was really fun.
I remember
Um,
noticing and appreciating that. There's a lot about the raids that's quite unique narratively that I appreciate.
I had never I had never played a raid in any game
Uh-huh.
before working on the raids, and I had to get a crash course from the designers who were really excited to work on this
Yeah,
kind of
yeah. Uh-huh.
content because they had rated in WoW and other
Mhm.
games, and they were real excited to try and do something like that for our game.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of came in with fresh eyes and ears because I just was like, okay, you have to explain to me what this is, what do players want out of them.
Mhm.
We want to have a story, but I want it to be an appropriate story, and I don't, we want to try and be tell enough that gets people interested, but not lay it on so thick that people are just like, shut up. I want to move forward. Right. So finding that
Yeah.
balance of, you've got people who are in there to do a thing and they're probably going to do it over and over again.
Yes.
So trying to find that balance and, I'm not going to say, oh yeah, we got everything right the first time. No, I mean, it was very much an experiment in a new game type for a game with, you know, so it was a learning experience. But what was really great is I could talk to the designers and get a sense for what they wanted to do, but also what they felt the players might want.
Uh-huh.
And I started watching a bunch of videos for a bunch of different games to see, like, well, how do they do narrative and raids in this game, right?
Right.
And a lot of them, at least in the videos that I watched, there didn't seem to be a ton. So I was like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe there's an opportunity to do something here. But using the dialogue system in a cool way, doing a lot of walk and talk, not doing a whole bunch of cinematics or whatever, and making sure that we leave space for the gameplay to be the star, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then, before or after a fight or just at key points, getting the information out that you want,
Mhm.
people to know about the characters of the story, then you put it in there, right?
Having kind of
Um,
season the experience, give it
yeah,
context.
exactly, right? So it was a different way to look at it because, when you're doing the Golden Path story, the story is sort of the centerpiece,
Mhm.
and you can afford to take. I mean, I would argue that you still want to be very mindful of pacing and how you do
Mhm.
it, but I think people who play the story are opting into an experience that is story heavy usually.
Yes.
So you have more time and space to do that kind of a narrative,
Mhm.
but the raids you have to scale back, right? And we leaned into the dialogue system to do a lot of that heavy lifting,
Mhm.
and it was really great working with the audio designers and the game designers and just understanding, okay, well, what systems do we have at our disposal? And you got traditional things just like the bark system, right? So
Uh-huh.
player enters combat or creature enters combat, they might have a list of things they could say, and when they're suffering a condition, they might look down that list and prioritize a thing they could say.
Mhm.
But then looking at narrative opportunities to use systems like that, at health thresholds, can we have characters, reveal a thing, or when there's a boss phase change? And this is all standard industry stuff, but it was kind of neat to dig in a little deeper and then look at how you could get all the player characters to potentially um, either say things out loud to where it's like, "Hey, I got there first. I'm the one who's speaking for the party,"
Mhm.
or, "Oh, I'm a mesmer, so of course I'm going to have something to say about the enemy
Yeah.
who's also a mesmer," or uh, when I find this thing, just goofy stuff like
Yeah.
that. So,
Built in some
uh,
neat conditions and edge cases.
Yeah, and it was really an interesting thing to where I appreciated a lot more of the work that the designers were doing because they kind of put on
Mhm.
that hat about thinking about things in terms of situations and conditions, and it really got me thinking a little bit more about the narrative design aspect of the writing and making sure, like for example, we would have a bunch of alternate lines. So if we know you're going to be playing the content a lot,
Mhm.
we want to make sure there's a lot of dialogue variety so that if you're playing through the same scene, maybe you'll hear a different line of dialogue that you didn't hear before.
Yeah.
But also putting aggressive cooldowns on it. So, one of the biggest, I think, mood killers in a game is hearing the same dialogue over and over and over again. It's really annoying. And
Mhm.
maybe it's a great line, but when you hear it 10 times, it's not good anymore. So, the system allowed us to put like cooldowns and replay delays and things like that on it, and it was really interesting to kind of get in there and situationally try and find that sweet spot to where,
Uh-huh.
okay, this thing might actually happen a whole bunch of times. It's really important that they hear it the first time, but after that, man, we can wait a while. Maybe we have a sound effect that carries that weight
Mhm.
going forward, or people will still see the skill effect, so they don't need obvious commentary about that skill because we've already kind of trained them that when they heard that line the first time and that skill went off, now they've made that connection.
Uh-huh.
But we also play that skill effect, that sound effect, and now they know that these things are all interrelated.
Mhm.
And then we can, people can hear certain sound effects over and over again, and it's not quite as jarring as hearing the same line of dialogue. So
Yeah.
you can kind of play with those
Language really
things.
grabs at your attention in a different kind of
Exactly.
way.
Well,
Yeah.
because it's so specific, right?
Yeah.
And I think, uh, you know, if you want it to feel better, you have to be very mindful of the player's time and also making sure that they're not just getting barraged with things that maybe you want them to hear a bunch of times, but they clearly don't, right?
Right.
Um, so that was actually another thing, narrative design wise and game design wise. We said, okay, if you are doing the escort event with Glenna, for example, at the very
Mhm.
beginning, when you tell her, okay, let's go, and she picks up the bomb, there's like this whole scene that plays out, right?
Mhm.
And we were like, okay, the first time that you do this, get the full scene. It's like 10 or 12 lines of dialogue. It's kind of a long scene, but it's
Mhm.
not super long. And there's some little funny moments. But if you cross the bridge and you get killed, we don't want you to have to sit through this long scene again,
Yeah.
right? People are going to hate us. They're going to hate hearing this, and that's not what we want.
Right.
So we built a fallback scene that basically, if you've heard that other scene, uh, and you're retrying the mission, we just shortcut it to like a 3-line version of it so that you can get started faster.
Right.
It's just like little things like that that I think you have to think about and try, and if you want to make for a really uh, pleasant play experience where it's immersive but it feels more natural, you have to start thinking about, it's just as important to make decisions when not to say something that it is to when to say it, right? And when to just let the game be the game and not to
Yeah.
throw dialogue everywhere where
Yeah.
it is
Or leave
might
negative
not be needed.
space.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was listening to a lecture by Brandon Sanderson, um, fantasy author, and he talked about how, and this is for writing, fiction novels, so different world. But he talked about the principle, like a triangle principle, where like you want to have like you want to leave the top part of your triangle as negative space,
Mhm.
and the bottom part can be grounded in what you're actually saying, because it gives people a break. It lets them fill in the blanks. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
what people expect to hear when they're being told a story.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that because I kind of think about it as like, so for instance, like I think a lot of games that resonate with people are, they do this thing where it's like the critical, the golden path, the main thing that you need to know in order for this to make sense and
Mhm.
have dramatic and storytelling impact has to happen, and that's sort of non-negotiable.
Uh-huh.
But you can leave a lot of stuff in the margins, whether it's out in the world for you to explore, or in how you write the scene. If you, like you said, you leave that negative space, if you put a lot of subtext into the dialogue between two characters,
Uh-huh.
you can get the person who's playing or watching to fill in the blanks. They'll say one thing, but they actually mean something else, and it starts
Yes.
getting you going like, okay. Um, Sometimes that's just, it makes them feel more invested because they realize that people don't always say what they mean, right? And there's sort of
Mhm.
when you're in on what it is they actually mean, you feel like, okay, this is a real person.
You're getting it.
Uh,
You feel like
yeah, right.
you're playing the game.
You're playing the game.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is like this idea of opting in, right?
Mhm.
And I think what's important in games in general, but especially like in stuff like raids, is you want the story to be there in a satisfying way so that when people decide to opt into it, they're like, okay, I found this thing. I actually want to see what it is.
Mhm.
That's the opportunity where they've made a conscious choice to do a thing or to learn or to kind of take a peek at what might be a little deeper below the surface.
Uh-huh.
You want to give them just enough to where they're interested, and they'll either make the decision, yeah, I don't care, and then they go off and no harm, no foul,
Mhm.
or you gave them just enough to where they want to learn more. So then
Mhm.
they're going to start looking around for the next bit of information so that,
Right.
like you were saying, they're finding these parts that are actually related and mentally they have to put it together. Um, Having people work at it a little bit, right? Um, be, because not, well, here's the other thing, they're not always going to put it together the same way. And what's really
Mhm.
interesting is sometimes I'll see what players, how they interpret some of this stuff, and some of them will interpret the parts and put them together either in a different order or just their takeaway is slightly different, and it might
Mhm.
not be the intent,
Uh-huh.
but it's really an interesting thing. So sometimes I'll actually watch live streamers play the game and then comment on a thing a character said or a note that they found or a gadget that they interacted with and then a thing happened,
Mhm.
and sort of where their mind's at. And early on, of course, they're going to speculate and probably be all over the place, but
Mhm.
my hope is that when they get to the end they're very close to what we were hoping that they
Mhm.
walked away with, right? But I really do believe strongly in leaving a lot of that stuff, putting it in there deliberately, and then
Mhm.
letting people find it. Give them just enough so that everything connects and makes sense and is satisfying. But provide more that if they really want to learn and put it together, and also feel like clever that they kind of solved the mystery in their head. Like that's just really cool. I
Mhm.
love playing games that are like that, and my hope is that people who are experiencing it that way might also get some enjoyment
Mhm.
out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have enjoyed it personally. I can recall, entering, the first raid wing for the first time and stumbling into those notes and then
Oh yeah,
realizing, "Oh, there's like a" and realizing that this wasn't gonna tell me a story the way I was used to, and that it was gonna make me look for it. And, you're in a group, and so the group dynamic
exactly.
matters, and, like, they wanna do the content. And people have done
Yeah,
this 10 times, I've never done it once. So, like, I'm
yeah,
like, my
yeah.
interest in the story is different than their interest, so, like, I kind of rush through the content, and but then I can go back
You
and
can go
look
back when
like
it's clear.
yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, I mean, we did a couple things, right? We wanted to put an achievement in there that basically said, "Hey, find these things,"
Uh-huh.
and then it's like, okay, I can tell that there's a list of these 10 things. So if all I'm looking for is the achievement, I just need to find these 10 things, right? Fine, and and I remember when I was working with the designer to script it, I'm like, I'm gonna make this harder. I'm gonna turn off all those name tags. So you
I love
normally in
that.
an MMO, there's like name tags everywhere, and
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
tree, rock, and I'm like, come on, like, give me a break. Looking at it, you know what it is. So I always just found that kind of silly in games, right? That everything has like a name tag on it.
Yeah.
Um, but whatever. It's part of the game. It's part of the UI and the UX. But we figured, okay, you're going and you're doing this content. If you're going to find this stuff, if all you had to do is hit the win button and see everything, that's kind of lame. So I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, let's just hide that stuff. You have to get near it to where either you see it and you know it's there, or you get close enough that you get that little interact where it
Mhm.
says like,
Mhm. The UI
examine
element
or
pops up.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then you found a thing, right? So that was one thing where like, okay, let's make people work for it a little bit.
Mhm.
And I remember QA was like, yeah, the name tags aren't on. I said, yep, by design. Closed it out, and it was like, no, we this is deliberate.
Oh, that's
Um,
nice. I like that.
well, it was great, and they were like, oh, okay, cool. And then they went and they tested it, and it was
Yeah.
awesome. But uh, yeah, there was something. Oh, here's the other thing. We were
Mhm.
very deliberate in terms of where we put that stuff. In that, um, number one, when you're in a raid group, right? Not everybody's ready at the same time. A lot of people are like, okay, I gotta go get something to eat. I'll be back in 5 minutes, right? And you're just standing around and
Mhm.
maybe looking through your build or your inventory or whatever. But there is some downtime, and we figured that while you're waiting for things to happen, let's just make sure that we have a couple of things there for you to do. Maybe you only do it once, but if we have something there for you to click on, you're probably going to click on it the first time to just be like, well, what is this thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And if we make it interesting enough, then you're like, ooh, setting up a mystery. What's going on? And then you find the next thing, and then it starts to, you know, fill in the picture a little bit.
Mhm.
Like there was that character who was by the wall, and we knew that in the next raid wing, the way that we had the level designer had made it
Mhm.
was that on the other side of the wall was going to be this um, like sacrificial pit or whatever, right?
I
So
remember
we're like, okay,
speculating so hard about what was on the other side of that wall when I was doing Wing
I'm
1.
glad because what the whole point was is like if we make it sound like that this person's there and they can hear this thing going on, we can kind of
Yeah.
set up the expectation so that when you actually get there, there's a thing there and it's the thing that they were talking about
Yeah.
2 months ago, right, or whatever. So we tried to put those things in places where we knew there wasn't going to be combat, or you could clear the area and then it was safe to just do this stuff.
Mhm.
But then also just when you clear the wing, you can just go back and do it at your own pace.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that one was pretty fun. And then we had this whole thing where after you beat the end boss, you can just collect your stuff and get out of there.
Mhm.
But we created like a whole little area that was up there that wasn't being used. And we were like, let's put the prisoners up there. We've been talking about all these prisoners, so let's let you go up and just kind of talk to them.
Yeah,
And
like a
they
little
said
tree
stuff that,
village.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that was a really interesting map. I think the origins of it were sort of like a concept or whatever from a different, like I think some of the art was originally meant for something else.
Okay.
And then when we decided to do the raids in the fashion that we were doing, some of it
Mhm.
was repurposed and moved
Mhm.
around. And I remember working with uh, the level artist at the time. I think on the first one it was actually Tirza,
Hmm.
and it was just really wonderful to be like, hey, kind of the setup here is these soldiers have been kidnapped and they're all brought here, but they're not all there. So we want to have them go up, and you can, there's an achievement to it. Just a little thing, just to make it feel like a little fun, like there was a little bit more to the story than they're
Mhm.
just telling you this thing happened, but we're not actually showing it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, she put all these cages in there, and the designer scripted the cages that you could interact with them. And we're like, okay, let's write a scene between the player who opens it and the character and stuff. So it was just really fun that we were able to kind of create a story that took place in multiple raids, and that we had to think far enough ahead to how all these things connected, such that we
Mhm.
were making deliberate game design decisions, art decisions, and narrative decisions, so that when
Right.
you finally got to the end, it actually felt like a cohesive experience and
I love
story.
that exploration process. That narrative exploration was some of the most fun I've had probably in the game.
Oh,
Also,
thank you.
like I raided old like back in the day. Like I ran a 40-man raid
Oh,
guild
wow.
in like early World of Warcraft. Like I'm a mega nerd, man. And
Aren't
um
we all, man?
well, I mean, we're here talking about video games in
Yeah, I
our
was
off
about to say,
hours.
like,
So
I
like
think we
I
might have similar interests.
preaching to the choir. Uh
Yeah.
yeah. So I love that, and I loved like the how the you get into the wing one and it's bandits, and like there's weird noises on the other side of the wall, and eventually it resolves into a white mantle, and it links back up with the story being told through the season. And I know that
Yep.
I saw in your credits you were the lead writer on both the raids and season 3.
Uh,
And is that actually
yeah. I
the
mean,
credit situation was a little confusing to me.
it's a little weird. So, what I would say is this: for the first four raids,
Uh huh.
I was like the only writer, basically.
Okay.
When I think on the second raid, Angel, who was on the team at the time, did some of the refugee or the people who you rescue.
Yeah.
She did the scene dialogue there, and she wrote some of the notes and stuff. But all four of the raids, I basically worked with the team and our narrative director at the time to kind of come up with a story arc.
Hmm.
And I basically did the writing and a lot of the narrative design. I mean,
Hmm.
the game designers did a lot of the hookup and implementation, and they did some of the narrative design too. I mean, actually, that's one thing that's kind of cool about ArenaNet is, uh, our team is narrative, and we call ourselves writer narrative designers, right?
Hmm.
Because we write, but we bare minimum have to know a lot of conceptual narrative design so that we can have meaningful collaboration with game designers. And some of us
Right.
actually do some of the somewhat technical hookup or whatever, but mostly like on the VO side and
Some
not
cross
necessarily.
discipline stuff going on.
Yeah, a little bit. But our game designers actually do a lot of the narrative design too, right? They
Uh
might
huh.
not write a bunch of the dialogue that actually ships. I mean, they'll write some like stub dialogue, and if it's good and it works, we're like, okay, cool, we'll keep
You
that.
riff off of it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But otherwise, we're basically responsible for making sure that the scripts are, a certain way by the end of it, right? But their focus is really on the encounters and the logic of, setting up the kind of story steps. But the implementation of the scenes, the blocking, the characters moving around, like they do all that, and that's narrative design work as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned, right? So it's great because there's a ton of overlap. All this is to say, I was basically the primary or only writer on the first 4 raids.
Uh huh.
And then my role for that is I was doing, like I was the lead of that because I was, like, the only one doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I get it.
in terms of, like, my lead responsibilities on Living World, I was more of managing things and not doing a ton of the writing. So,
I see.
you know, being a lead or being a manager, your what you do and how you do it can flex between
Hmm.
projects, right? So even though technically I was a lead writer or the narrative lead on like the core game, for example,
Hmm.
I didn't write the Golden Path story.
I see.
I was responsible
More
for
of
the
an
open
oversight.
world.
Okay.
It was open. It was the open world dialogue, so dynamic event, ambient, some of
Sure.
the systemic chatter, stuff like that. The Golden Path story was actually done by 2 other writers who were, Reese Hosby and Jeff Grubb, who were
The personal
at
story.
yeah, they had done personal story and
Yeah.
the dungeon story, right? So
Oh sure.
the Destiny's Edge stuff. Rhea actually went on to write the 3rd novel to Sea of Sorrows. I think it's been a while, but yeah.
Yeah.
And Jeff had actually was a co-writer on the first book with Matt Forbeck, and Rob King did the second
Ghosts
one.
of
Sorry, I'm like,
Ascalon.
yeah, Ghost of Ascalon.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was our first tie-in novel. Um, but so having that title can mean a different thing depending on, where I am needed or where people need to be
Sure.
focusing their work, right? So, in some cases I would lead the charge on the story. In other cases, I'm there just to kind of help manage things and, do a lot
Help
of almost
facilitate. Oh,
production.
yeah.
Yeah, call meetings, make sure that things are getting addressed, check in with
Right.
people, if they're having technical problems, work with the tools team to help resolve it,
Yeah.
onboarding new hires, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think in a lot of the seasons, I might write content for it, but not as like the like showrunner writer or anything like that.
Just
I
rolling up
would,
your sleeves.
yeah,
Kind of.
helping the team.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like because I've been in the company so long and I know how a lot of these things have to be,
Yeah.
done. Uh, I pretty much go where I'm needed and
Sounds
help
like you
out, and
wear a
that's
lot
why.
of hats.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and what's been great about having Tom, I mentioned him before, Tom Abernathy.
Yeah.
Uh, he comes from a screenwriting
The
background.
director, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. He has been great because I think we complement each other really well in that he really kind of comes from a craft perspective,
Okay.
and in my opinion, ever since he joined the studio, he really kind of focused us in terms of writing our stories more dramatically in the same way that maybe a serialized television show would. Right? We
Uh-huh.
adopted some
Uh-huh.
processes that he had used, in some of his screenwriting days. And he had been in the industry, tied to the GDC Narrative Summit for a long time, right? So he knew games and he knew
Mhm.
that because I had worked on Guild Wars for a long time because I knew the tools and processes and had a hand in, at least giving guidance in for the people who were actually building that stuff, but also knowing how to use it.
Yeah.
What was really great is the two of us could kind of get together and then, approach the problems that needed solving and go where we were needed. Um, and it actually worked out really well, right? So I think I can focus on things like people management or hiring or the mentorship program or just hey, you know what, like here's the funny thing, I didn't do a ton of writing on season 5, at least not at the beginning. Like I did some script punch up and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but
Icebreaker
I wasn't
Saga.
like,
Mhm.
yeah. But as the releases went on and the more that people needed help with it, like okay, I'm going to write some ambient scenes over here, or I'm going to take this first draft and
Mhm.
take it to the finish line, or so a lot of the stuff that I've been doing lately is while the rest of the team is kind of working away on End of Dragons, I'm kind of helping to make sure that the last bits of Icebrood Saga stuff are where they need to be. So I'm working
Uh-huh.
with the design lead on that, and I'm getting in there and doing a lot of the like dialogue timing, or I'm writing a bunch of the journal stuff, which not everybody even reads, right? But it
Mhm.
it does need to be accurate, right? So just because I've done this so many times over the years, I
Yeah.
can just be like, listen, I'll take this off your plate. You concentrate on hitting this deadline for this recording session that we've got coming up, and like
Right.
we'll make sure that this release goes out and it's in good shape, right? So
Yeah.
um, if the work needs to get done, I'm not shy about doing it, but I'm also happy to let the team tank the writing, and for me to take care of other things. Like we just
DPS
hired
down.
yeah, exactly. Well, like we just had to hire some people, and I've
Uh-huh.
spent the past few months going through candidate resumes and setting up phone calls and
Yeah.
sending out
A
notes
lot of work
on
goes into that.
portfolios. Yeah, and it takes time, man. Like we had
Mhm.
a job like I don't know, year or two ago where we had like 500 applicants, and
Oh.
I am very empathetic to people who really hate the hiring process.
Uh-huh.
I mean, in games or just anywhere. Like being someone in a position looking for a job, it's a tough position.
Yes.
It's you either want a job or you really need one because you're out of work. And usually the story is people just shotgun their resume everywhere, and they
Mhm.
might not even get more than and they might not even get any reply, right? Or they'll get the automated, yeah, we got it. Don't call us, we'll call you, and that's the
Uh-huh.
last they hear, right? That's a really sucky
Yes.
experience, right? And I can't say that, oh, that'll never happen. Like, of course it's going to happen when you've got 500 or 1,000 people
Right. It's a scale issue.
throwing their stuff into it. Like, you can't necessarily give a hand, what do you call it? Like the white glove service to everybody who sends
Yeah.
their stuff in.
To give a personal
But
message to follow up on,
exactly.
like
So one thing that I try to do is just if they're clearly way off, and this was just they needed to send out 5 applications to get their unemployment, but they're not even like they don't even do this. It was just like kind of a, a shotgun
yeah.
approach. We'll send you the automated rejection, right? But if it looks like you're really trying,
Mhm.
my hope is that bare minimum, I can at least put some bit of information that might give you some context as to why maybe
Yes.
you didn't, right? Like, so for example, if it's a senior position and someone clearly has never done this before, or their portfolio is good, but they just don't have the on the job experience, and it's like, listen, you're just not right for this. Maybe you're right for a junior position, but you're not right for a senior one.
Mhm.
I'll actually take that response and put that in there. We require X amount of years of experience. You do not meet this requirement, and that's why
Wow.
you didn't get it,
In
right?
my
Oh,
job applying experience, that's dramatically more than most companies will do. That's
yeah, well, and if we the agreement I've made with myself, and it has
uh-huh.
got me into trouble at least once, just in that it created a lot more work for me than I really
Yeah.
should have taken on, was if we get to the point where we have a phone call,
Mhm.
I kind of make a point to, as much as I can. And again, there have been edge cases where I haven't been able to do this, but
Mhm.
most of the time, I want to make a commitment to myself, but also to the person applying, that I'm going to give them the decency of a callback to let them know what happened, right?
Mhm.
And the other day, we had some interviews with some really wonderful candidates, right?
Mhm.
But if you've got one position open and you get a lot more people, you can't make everybody's day and give them the job. You have to pick, the person who's right for it.
Right.
And the thing is, when people are that close, when they get an interview and they don't get the job, I really feel like it's in everybody's interest to let them know why, and have that human discussion where you're like, "Hey, we loved meeting you. You did really great in these areas. There were a couple of things that ultimately made us go with somebody else, right?" And sometimes
Sure.
it's about the other candidate. The other candidate just had more experience. The other candidate was a better fit for the team, or
Uh-huh.
whatever, right? And it's going to be different in every case. But in some cases, it's like, "Hey, when we asked you questions about narrative design, you really didn't give us anything of substance, right?"
Sure.
Uh, or you gave us an answer that sounded like you were making up something on the spot and you were sort of covering for the fact that you didn't know. We try to create a safe space to where if somebody doesn't know something, they can just tell us. Like, your job is not to try and trick the other person in the conversation. Your job is
Right.
to be honest so that we know what we're getting, you know what you're getting from us. And, if we can answer the question, we answer it honestly. And if we can't, we
Mhm.
just say, sorry, I can't talk about that. Right. And in the case of a person interviewing, like, I want them to know what they like, if they're ever interested, if they really wanted to work with our team or on the game, I want to give them something that they can think about. Right.
Mhm.
And in some cases, like, there was a person who we hired at first, or sorry, we interviewed at first, did not give them the job.
Mhm.
I called them back and I said, it was great meeting you and talking to you, but we're not going to move forward. Um, Here are the reasons why.
Uh-huh.
And here are the things you can work on in the meantime.
Mhm.
Well, when you know it, 6 months later, we had another opening, and their name was sort of fresh in my head. And I said, hey, we have this other position. Are you interested in applying? They said, oh, yeah. Right, and I did that with a couple of candidates, not just this one.
Yeah.
There were a few people who we had talked to. I was like, "Hey, like, maybe we should talk to this or take another look." And when you know it, this person took that advice, changed their portfolio, and played a whole bunch more games. And when we started asking them questions about narrative design, they could answer them.
They
And
took the
everybody,
feedback to heart.
they took it to heart, and we ended up hiring them. And I was like, "Okay, that's
That's a
sort of
great
like
story.
a success story, right?"
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the mentorship program. Like, we just hired a contract writer.
Mhm.
Actually, we just hired two people who had gone through the mentorship program. And what was really wonderful is, we saw that they had talent and potential. So we said, "Hey,
Mhm.
we don't think you have enough experience to where you could easily find a job, but if you're willing to participate in this program, you know, it's not a job. We're not going to ask you to do any work. It's completely voluntary in terms of like how much time, basically it's like you get access to us, you can show us your work and we'll give you critique.
Sure.
We'll have some presentations or discussions where hopefully we'll impart some, industry wisdom or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but it also gives us a chance to see how they develop. Do they, how are they in a group setting? And
Yes.
if they show us really great work and we see that they could be a very good culture add. They're not only getting along well with people, but they're bringing something to the
Mhm.
team that we could really benefit from. Right? They get the experience and they get to learn from us, and then hopefully we can create a path that they can get a job, whether it's with us or with somebody else. Right? And
Mhm.
we've been fortunate. Three different people who have been through the mentorship program, we've actually been able to give opportunities to, and there are others who have gone on to great success and they've said, "Oh yeah, by the way, I was working in this industry," and then like two of the people who were in the mentorship program have gone on to director positions only a
Uh-huh.
few years later after, and it's because they were talented, they worked hard, and they learned and they put in their,
Mhm.
uh, they put in their time actually in the trenches working and doing this stuff, and they developed their skills to the point where when that next job was available, they were able to go out and get it,
Mhm.
and that's awesome, when good people are able to really make a career out of something and open up doors for people. And, it's just, it's awesome. So,
Yeah. It sounds like Bobby, like you're very like community minded almost. Like you care not just about the health of the game you're working on or the studio people working at the studio, but the overall like community of people who are doing this kind of work.
yeah, it's twofold. Thank you for saying that. Like, I do care about the community in that, like, if there's an opportunity to connect with people,
Uh-huh.
whether it's at a convention or just popping in the forums or something like that, it's really gratifying because I think people have thought enough about our game that they've invested their time, whether they play the free thing and they got a couple hours out of it and decided to move on, or whether they've actually bought the game and been with us
Mhm.
since day one. I'm curious, like, why they play it, what they like, what they don't
Mhm.
like, what could we do better. Some of it is just, hey, they're really looking for something else that we're not providing. We can either make the conscious choice to provide that, or we can just say, hey, that's great. Our game, we don't. That's not what our game's about.
Uh-huh.
But you can find that, and we want you to be happy, right? So I think that's one of the things that we're happy about the game being sort of like pick up and play. You don't have to worry about your credit card getting hit every month with a
Right.
subscription charge, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's easy for people to get in and out if they need to.
It's
And I
very
think there,
respectful of people's time and resources.
I hope so. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure people would have opinions uh, different than that, but
Yeah.
about certain
That's
aspects of
my
the game. But
opinion.
yeah, no, um, but thank you. I mean, I think definitely one of the things that we were trying to do, and again, I'm not trying to speak on behalf of design or anybody else, but I think the overall sort of, I don't know, identity of the project was to try and be a bit more respectful of people's time and
Uh-huh.
also to feel like we would, the community is the thing that is responsible for our success, right? If
Uh-huh.
people didn't like the game we were playing, didn't play it, I wouldn't have this job, right? So, I think we have a lot of uh, thankfulness for the people who have been with us as long as they have. Um, and I think what's been wonderful is just getting to know some of the people in the community and hearing
Uh-huh.
what they have to say. And sometimes it's just, hey, a content creator or a fan is going to make a video, and maybe they'll say something that is very nice and complimentary. Maybe they'll call out a thing they hate, and they'll
Mhm.
totally bag on the thing that I spent 6 months working on or whatever, right? But and I know I'm not going to, I or we are not going to make everybody happy, but even
Yeah.
just hearing that standpoint is like, what is this person actually like? And
Mhm.
you know should we, there's always something to learn from it. And sometimes the thing you learn is, okay, this is not for you because we're trying to do something different than what it is that you're looking for. And other times it's,
Mhm.
I see what they want, and that seems like a really cool thing to strive
Mhm.
toward, right? And then maybe we'll do a better job on the next thing, or maybe
Yeah.
we'll go back and fix a thing that didn't necessarily land as well as we wanted, right?
Right.
So it's been really kind of humbling, but also rewarding, meeting people in real life or just online. So
Mhm.
um, yeah, I think in terms of, you know, the community is the people we work with and the people who we work for, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
right? And I value both of those things.
Mhm.
I think it is kind of a core part of
I think that
who we are.
reads. I think that reads.
I hope so.
Bobby, I wanna be respectful of your time. I asked you for a couple of hours. So, um,
Okay. I know it's late by you.
I'm enjoying the conversation, and I'm happy to continue it. So, I'll
We can
make it
talk
up
a
to
little
you.
bit longer.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to keep going, I've got a little bit more energy, and then I'm probably gonna have a slice of pizza or something.
Oh, that sounds good. Let's do it. Actually, if I may ask for a couple minutes just to refresh my
Sure,
beverage, and then we'll
please.
continue.
Okay, you
Okay.
want to take a quick break?
Yeah,
All
let's
right, I'll
do
be right
5 minutes. Let's plan for 5.
5 minutes. All right, I'll be
All
back
right.
in 5.
Be right back, folks. One of the things you
Yeah.
were just talking about, Bobby, is how much respect you have for the feedback that comes back to you, not just from the community of developers, but the community of gamers who are making your game possible, making all
Mhm.
games possible.
Yeah.
Um, and it was interesting to hear you call out, like, you take feedback from people and you try to hear the truth in it, it sounds like. Um,
Yeah. It's funny because people, when they have something to say, some people only have something to say when they're unhappy, and other times
uh-huh.
people have something to say because they just want people to understand, what's important to them or what, how they feel about a certain thing. And I think the important thing is to try and get at the heart of what the message is, because sometimes it can be obscured by the way that it's delivered, right? So I'm always interested in, well, like before we were talking about subtext, you're saying one thing but you mean something else. A lot of times when people are giving feedback, they're saying one thing, but really what they mean is below the surface of that. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes you have to kind of ask questions or try and parse meaning from something that
Yeah.
maybe it's not readily apparent in the way that it was presented. So, and that's just getting to know people, right?
Hmm.
I think when it's the same people giving you the same feedback, you can start to develop a relationship and learn how to communicate with them. But in other cases, it's just I watch a lot of YouTube, right?
Hmm.
And some of it's gaming related, and some of it's about Guild Wars, and some of it's about other games that I like to play or
Hmm.
that I'm curious about learning about, right? And hearing people talk about the thing that they like or that they wish were different or better, can be really enlightening in
Mhm.
some ways. So it is an aspect of being a developer that I appreciate. I can't say that I enjoy every minute of it because there have been cases where it's just kind of demoralizing, right?
Right.
Uh, you know, I mean, that's just sort of being online, right? Sometimes when a bunch of people have something to say that might be constructive or critical, it can sometimes be difficult to hear.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's important to hear, right? So
Mhm.
I think if if you're the kind of developer who can navigate those waters and maintain a healthy balance and kind of like that, uh, I don't know, just work life balance or just overall happiness. uh, I think it's a worthwhile thing, but I think not everybody um, needs to do it. Not everybody has to do it. So I think for any given developer, they have to kind of make the decision that makes the most sense for them, and then
Mhm.
engage as much or as little as they feel appropriate.
Mhm. Yeah. Like, I know that people make very different decisions about how to engage with social media. Some people are comfortable just, like, having their lives hanging out there, and it doesn't really drag them down. Some people, are much more in the camp of, like, "I can't engage with it without getting consumed by it." They treat it almost like a dangerous substance.
Yeah, well, yeah, social media can do that. I I think over time I've sort of been very selective about the things that I share, either about myself or the people who I care about, or work or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
Just I think everything that you put out there says something. There's the digital footprint, and people can interpret it a variety of ways.
Mhm.
And um, I think some people definitely like and appreciate being seen, or having a persona, or just being well known.
Uh-huh.
And I think other people like the uh, relative obscurity, you know,
Okay.
being more someone who can observe and take it in, but not necessarily have to be out there or have your whole life out there.
Yeah.
And I think I'm somewhere in between. I like having a public presence such that I can engage with people who care about the work that I do,
Uh-huh.
or are interested in this industry, or the studio or something. But at the same time, I don't feel the need to put it all out there. I just, I have to find the balance that makes sense for me and for my family. So
Yeah.
that's just the way that I go about it. So
I hear you. Yeah, I think we live in a time where, um, I think we're all kind of figuring out as, like, the community, people making and playing games, um, and, of course, worldwide too, but, like, just thinking about even the gaming space is huge, of how do we interact with each other? Um, like, a big part of the reason why, we got connected is because I've seen you out there. Like, I've seen you
oh
on
wow,
guild chats, I've seen you on Twitter, I've seen you on Reddit, and it's like, "Oh, this is like a person I can connect with." So, like, that what you said is literally true in this case. Like, you putting yourself out there is how we connected, how we're able to have this conversation. Whereas someone else, who isn't putting themselves out there and has chosen, like, yeah, like, that's kind of the trade-off you make. Um, and, like, I'm just I don't know if I have a question about this, but it is something I'm personally very fascinated about because you see different people from different studios, from different kinds of games, have different kind of postures about engaging with their gaming community.
yeah,
And we all can think of cases where it's gone wrong. Um,
yeah,
and there are also cases where it's gone really right. There's some
hmm,
games that where like some rare communities where the developers and the community really seem like they're in love with each other almost. Like I think of like old school RuneScape as like an example. Um, but it's an
that's cool.
interesting space where we're all wrangling this new technology and the powers of identity it gives us. And I don't know. I think that being out there, being on the front lines, even if it's just in a constrained way, is like it speaks to. It sounds. I'm guessing maybe it's what I'm hearing is it's speaking towards like that overall approach that I hear from you about like get out there, try to connect, see where there's value, and like just raise the overall bar.
I hope so. I mean, I kind of look at this as, the world is bigger than just, the things that I see and engage in, right? And but when we're out there, whether it's what we do in the work that
Mhm.
we do or create, it's going to have an impact that is farther reaching and might even outlive us, right? And I've always looked at it as you make a choice every day in terms of how you leave the world. And I feel like if we're going to make an impact, let's make a positive one. Let's try and make sure that we're pushing things in the right direction, even if it's just in small ways, even if it's just to the people around us. The internet has opened things way wide to where you
Yeah.
can talk to people who you would never meet in real life. What they call it, meet space or whatever. Um, I'll give you an example though. When I first was freelancing and thinking about getting into video games, I ended up interviewing a fair number of developers who,
Mhm.
like you said, I knew about them because they were a name, right?
Yeah.
Whether back in the day when there were magazines, you'd read about uh, like John Romero, or you'd read
Yes.
about um, Cliff Blazinski, or you'd read about
Mhm.
Brenda Romero, right? Or anybody who had an impact on the industry and made a thing that had touched a lot of lives, right?
Mhm.
So when I was freelancing, just on a whim, I was like, look, if I'm doing most of these interviews by email or phone, I'm just going to reach out to people and if they don't get back to me, whatever.
Mhm.
But I tell you, like, I think it was through John Romero's like website or something. It was like a contact me like, and I was just like, let me see if the guy wants to do an interview. And he got back to me. He's like, sure. And the next thing I know, I'm like, this is bizarre. Like, how many hours I spent playing Doom, and now, you know, so this
Yeah.
person who made such a big impact is answering, these silly questions that I've got.
I can
And
totally relate to that.
yeah, right. So it was a big uh mind trip. And then the funny thing is, so I back then, this was like more than 20 years ago, I had a friend out in Seattle and we would come out and visit. And I was like, you know what? If I'm going to be out there visiting, I want to see if I can talk to somebody at any of these studios,
Mhm.
right? So back when gas powered games was around, and there was like Chris Taylor and other folks who worked there, I just same thing. I just went to the website, was like, hey, all right, doing, right for this website, want to interview some people.
Mhm.
Uh, Oddly enough, they were like, sure. They were totally open with it. They were probably like, who cares? Like, nobody knew who I was. I wasn't anybody, right? I was just
Mhm.
some weirdo who was living in Jersey at the time who was like, I want to talk to game devs, right? And
Uh-huh.
some of us, I was just legitimately interested in them or the work that they were doing. And also I was trying to get a peek inside,
Mhm.
a dev studio and just sort of learn a little bit more about the people behind the work, but also the work itself. And I ended up talking to a handful of people who, I think still in the industry. But it was funny. I remember meeting this really, really nice guy who was the, I guess, art director at the time there,
Mhm.
a guy by the name of Steve Thompson. And I remember we had this really fun discussion where he was talking about, playing Mario Sunshine. And he remembered when he got the game, he just kind of pointed the camera at the water and he was just amazed at sort of the technology that they had done to make the water look as good as it did, right?
Mhm.
And I remember it was sort of like his eyes lit up and he was like a kid talking about the
Yeah.
magic of video games, right? And it was
Yeah.
really a wonderful moment. I had it on my little handheld tape recorder and, went home, typed it up, published it and whatever. And, some people read it and
Mhm.
that was kind of all there was to it, right? Flash forward like 15 years and this guy shows up in one of the company emails at ArenaNet and it's like, hey, everybody welcome Steve Thompson, and he was at Gas Powered and all this stuff. I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna work with this guy.
Uh-huh.
I remember catching him in the cafeteria, and I said, Steve, this is gonna sound really weird. I promise this is like, I'm not stalking you." I said, "I interviewed you like 15 years ago. I went to your office." He goes, "Oh yeah, I remember." And he started talking about it, and it was this crazy full circle moment where
Uh-huh.
15 years ago I was sitting opposite a table, and he's telling me about how much he loves the water tech in Mario Sunshine, and now I'm working with this guy, and I got a chance to actually go in meetings where he was talking about, art direction for cinematics, and he's drawing storyboards and doing all this cool stuff. And man, what a like I thought he was a cool guy when I was interviewing him, and now here I am. I'm in meetings with him, and we're making creative decisions together.
Mhm.
And I'd talk about a story thing that we're doing, and his eyes would light up. He's like, "Yeah, we can frame the shot this way." And he was just, you never know. Like, the world is actually a smaller place than it may seem,
Mhm.
and the people you encounter for whatever reason, you never know when you might see them again, or maybe have the you know the ability or the opportunity, or just the pleasure of working with
Right.
someone, right?
Right.
So it really kind of brought it in a little bit that this was actually like games themselves, and the industry and the people who play them are a community. And I've been to, you know, numerous conventions and met people who then, like, I would meet in game, or the next time I was at that convention I would meet them again, or maybe when we had a community event they would come around and we would chat, and I would get to know them a little bit.
Mhm.
And it was really, like you said, games can really bring people together, and sometimes it's just the connection with other people that can sometimes be the biggest benefit from
The
playing the
biggest
game.
payoff. Yeah.
Yeah, right? So yeah, it's wild.
That's cool, man. That's an awesome story.
Oh, thank
I
you.
the thing you said about people being the payoff, something I really resonate with myself. Like one of my formative gaming moments, like when I was, I guess not strictly young, I was high school and college age. It was right when broadband was starting to gain adoption and Half-Life 1 had been released, and I was playing a game called Team Fortress Classic.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, such a great game.
Fun.
And I fell into a community, which was my first experience of playing of any kind of online community connection, because this is like before social media was around. Like no one was
Yep.
doing this. And I would play and I'd see people with these funny little symbols in their names. And I ask, "What's the symbol?" "Oh, it's my clan." It's like, "What? There's a
Mhm.
clan in this?" Like a guild kind of idea? And I asked them, I said, "Yeah, you can just go to our website and check it out." And like they have a like an IRC server to talk to each other using ICQ back in the day and
Dude,
like
you're speaking my
GameSpy.
language, man. Save Defeat was my game, right? And same thing, we
Yes.
rented a server, and we had our clan, and I got to know, actually, one of the guys who I met was right out of the military, I think, and I
Uh-huh.
was talking to him. He was a bit younger, and I we would just share stories about our lives. I'm still in touch with the guy on, like, Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, and this is like 20 years later from playing in this, goofy team-based shooter or whatever. Yeah, it's just the connections, man. So wait, so what happened with the Team Fortress thing?
Well, what happened was I got really into it. I led a clan with a couple of buddies of mine for about 3 years, and then eventually it kinda died. People went their own ways, you grow up. But then in 2018, I got a message from someone on Facebook, one of my old buddies who I was still kind of connected to. We didn't talk much, but he said, "Hey, download Discord and join this app. A bunch of TFC players are here." I was like, "What? TFC?" Like, it's like a movement in the force, like it kinda went past my ear. I checked it out, and, like, hundreds of people from this community that's almost 20 years old were just hanging out and talking about the old days, and we actually kinda brought the band back together, and we played some TFC, and now we most days, complain about work and our spouses, but,
Yeah,
like, it's a grown-up community of people where it's not just like, we're not just here to play a game, like, we're here to have a fellowship.
you connect. Yeah,
Yeah.
my father is in his 70s, and he plays Guild Wars probably like every night. I mean, he played. Here's the funny thing: before I got the job at ArenaNet, he did not play, and
Uh-huh.
I think he was being a supportive father and be like, "Oh, my son works at this
That's
place."
sweet.
And I said, "Dad, let me get you." Yeah, I bought him a copy of the game, and I figured it would just go on his, like, bookshelf and
Sure,
collect
sure.
dust or whatever. He actually installed it. He actually made a character, and he got so into it that next thing I knew, he was creating spreadsheets of like the gear that he wanted
Yes.
to, craft and like all the skills. Like he was because here's a guy who I think at the time was he had just retired after working 35 years,
Mhm.
in telecom or whatever, and now his hobby was genealogy and then playing this game hardcore.
Uh-huh.
And then he's like in a guild that's from Germany and all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, dude, you know, uh, it's just kind of nutty that sometimes the way that I keep in touch with my dad is I just hop in the game and we can chat that way.
That's rad. That is so rad.
It was very cool to have a family member being that like, because usually it's like, oh, that's nice. I have this,
Right. Right.
son or cousin or whatever who does this thing. But no, he was super. I mean, when I was a kid, he bought me the Commodore 64, and that was sort of like where I really started to
Start of it.
see. Yeah, exactly, right. Um, and yeah, so it was just really, really cool to have that continue.
That's very
And
cool. And
yeah,
how cool that we can have the technology to build an experience like this, to connect like this. How cool.
oh yeah. Do you ever watch I don't know how it's pronounced, Sirmore or something? There's a YouTuber who does VR chat interviews
Oh, I
with.
know. I think I know what you're talking about, though.
Yeah. So they'll be inhabiting these like kind of quirky avatars, right?
Yeah.
But having these really deep,
Like
sometimes
Anakin
very
Skywalker talking to Winnie the Pooh about, like,
exactly. Yep.
PTSD.
Yeah.
I've seen
It's
these.
amazing. I
Yes.
I love that human connection, right? And some of the people who he talks to, you know, a guy from I guess Germany or Sweden, I don't remember exactly, but uh, it was a couple of part interview where talking about working in a morgue, right,
Mm,
or a soldier who had gotten back from a tour of duty and was talking about their experiences in and out of the military and just like all that kind of stuff,
mhm,
or people who had traumatic time growing up and sort of what their experiences were, or uh, a man who is terminally ill with a sickness and sort of reflecting on his life. I mean, it's just really uh, fascinating human stories, just juxtaposed in this weird 3D
uh-huh,
world where everybody's you know mismatched and
mhm.
just kind of looking
It's this great
out of
dissonance.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool, and just yeah, the questions are really insightful and sometimes really hilarious. So, um, yeah, just it's amazing, like you were saying, just the fact that technology can bring people together in this new weird way, and some of
Mhm,
these people will probably never interacted or connected if not for this opportunity. It's sort of like an example of when technology is used for good, or at least good entertainment,
mhm.
rather than just people being horrible to each other
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, and I see stuff like this as like an answer or retort to, like, the idea that, like, the internet is a plague or, like, a mistake, or social media is
Some days it feels like it,
a
man. I got.
virus or something. Like, I mean, yeah, like, I really just respect that, we're all humans who evolved to live in tribal groups of, like, 30 people, and here we are all of a sudden connecting to 3,000 people every single day, and
Mhm.
we're not, like, we're literally, like, we've like, conceptually, we've almost, like, become cyborgs. We have all these ways to augment our function now.
Mhm.
And I guess as tool users, kind of conceptually, it goes back a long time. But man, like, I learned last year that I'm an adult sufferer of ADHD, which, thank God, I finally figured that out. Because it helped me really put some let's see, connect some dots together about my life and figure out how to work out some new tools. But I have all these things that I do now that if I didn't do them, like, I would be a less effective human. I'd be worse at my job, worse at doing this. Um, we are not limited by our mortal shells, you know, and we ought
Yeah.
not let ourselves be limited by it. I have that kind of compulsion inside of me, and I think we should, like, I see that those. What did you say that the creator's name was for the VR conversations?
Oh, I think it's Sirmore or
Sirmore.
Searmore.
I
Yeah.
should look that up. I'm not going to correct it in post. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Uh, hopefully, someone in the comments can correct me. But
Yeah.
that is like an example of like, yeah, this is something we should try to figure out, and
Yeah.
it's a big
By the way,
motivation for why I show up to do this.
yeah. Well, number one, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's really, um, thank you for not only trusting me but your community to kind of talk about your experiences like that. That's really awesome. I'm really happy that you were able to discover something about yourself. That it's funny that you mentioned that because I have family members like when you're growing up, you see people do things or behave in a certain way, and it's maybe back in the day, it's oh that's cousin so and so. We
Oh
don't
yeah,
talk about
he's a little
this
different.
person. Yeah, right. And then later on, you're an adult and you realize, oh, this person was struggling with
Yeah,
alcoholism, or they had a learning disability or something. Like
yeah, or
you
some
get older
crappy
and
thing happened to them that they're not allowed to talk about.
exactly right. And it, number one, when you start understanding that there's a lot more to people in the world that you see at first glance,
Hmm.
it opens it up in a way, and it hopefully allows you to be empathetic to them, but also to allows us to kind of reflect inward and kind of like, well, how can I learn from this, or how can I be better? Because yeah, I actually looking back on some of the things that I did or how I behaved or how I treated certain people as a younger individual,
Hmm.
I look back and I'm like, man, why was I such a jerk to this person, and why did I do this thing? And then as an adult, I have the ability to learn from it and correct it, and even go back and apologize to that
Hmm.
person, right? To get them to understand, hey, uh, I did a thing that in retrospect I shouldn't have done that probably made you feel bad, and I want to, do right by it. At least let you know that I'm sorry, right? And then try and
Right.
go on there. And sometimes it feels good to get it out, and other times you can actually move forward from it, right? And
Uh
it's
huh.
kind of amazing that our journeys can take us to so many places.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, the story that you shared is really inspiring. So thank you for that.
About the ADHD or about the TFC
Both.
community? Both. Okay.
Both, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because like you have shown sort of I think that is a snapshot that a lot of us in the gaming community
Uh huh.
can relate to, right? If we've been playing games for a long times that have that social component, you meet people and maybe you develop some of those connections.
Hmm.
But also throughout our journey in life, we can learn something about ourselves that actually causes us to reflect on who we are or things we've done or how we try to improve, right?
Hmm.
And whether we learn that from the people we encounter or we just learn that through life and then try and apply it so that we can do the things that we like and like want
Hmm.
out of life. The fact that I think, some of the challenges that you had gone through, you said that now that you've identified it, you can actually do things to make yourself better in your
Yes.
daily life or better at your like interviewing or
Yeah.
just connecting with people. And
Also,
that's
like, just kind of justify some things too. Like, I I don't know. I think most people do. I certainly have had parts of my personality that I feel like I've fought against for my whole life. Like, this is not a way I should be. Like, I'm not
mhm,
okay with this way that I am. Being able to understand something as big as ADHD, um, which is not the biggest thing out there, but big enough, um, has helped me not just treat myself, but also to honor myself in a way.
yeah,
Um, I've realized that a big part of the reason I focus so much on language and verbal communication, like what we're doing here, is because um, I learned the other day that there's this concept about ADHD called nonverbal working memory, which is
okay,
essentially the idea that is impaired with most people who suffer from ADHD. But usually verbal working memory is fine. So I tend to lean on that. And which is why listing is effective, which is why talking things out is effective.
nice,
But if I have to figure out how to get the air conditioners loaded into storage, like God help me. Like I can't think it through in my head. Um,
Gotcha. Yeah.
that kind of idea. And the more I learn about myself, the more I learn about the world. And I tend to think that conversations like these accelerate that process and increase the ability for the connections that are made and the work that gets done to add value. And it's like it's kind of a very idealistic way of seeing things, but man, it's why I show up for this. That's just me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're doing it. I'm very fortunate that actually that you reached out, and I'm glad we were able to do this.
Me too, Bobby. How you feeling? You ready to wrap this
I
up?
think I think I'm gonna get something to eat and maybe
Definitely.
unwind a little bit. But
Yeah.
this was really great, man. Thank you so much.
I had a great time too, Bobby. Thank you. Uh, for those who have stuck around, why don't you let folks know where to find you if they want to hear more about what you think and what you're doing?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. It's just at Bobby Stein, um, and I sometimes lurk around the Guild Wars forums and whatnot. Sometimes, like you said, I'm on Guild Chat or something. But
Mhm.
yeah, don't get out and play live music as much as I said. I was going to talk about bass, so
Uh,
I also play
yeah.
bass. But
There's a bunch of
unfortunately,
things we
nobody.
didn't get to. We can have a part two
Yeah,
sometime.
it's totally fine. But I'm just having some fun. Yeah. So yeah, catch me on Twitter or whatever. And yeah, thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. I'm Deeg. This is Basementside Chats. Thanks, Bobby. And thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care, man. Have a good one.
You too. Hey, thanks, chat. I haven't forgotten about you guys. Thanks, Easy Rocka. Thanks, Mixa. Thanks, Lorenity. Thanks, Darkbringer GW2. Thanks, Danger Moderator Voltage. Thanks, Janordi. Thanks, Melvin Harden. Thanks, The Right Game. Thanks, Maxentius Plays. Thanks, I'm Grimjack for the raid. Thank Mighty Teapot soliciting the expansion leaks. Sorry, buddy. And thanks all of y'all who are watching this after the fact.